go ahead when you're ready. Sorry, this is new because we're not, we're trying to streamline it, but it's going a little faster than people are used to. So we'll get back to that. Okay.
And we are all live and ready to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa. Good evening, everyone. We're back from recess. And we need someone to entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated May 4th.
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are the minutes in there? Can you?
I'm sorry. So work group minutes are not available. So
Okay.
sorry, just skip over that. Sorry about that.
No problem. So we're just gonna wait for Eric
People to join.
and Sherry to join our meeting. But I can kind of frame for our time today because we do have quite a bit to discuss today. So first we'll start with a Title IX policy update. And I think Eric and Charisse are going to be leading that part of the discussion for us. It's a really needed, really important update that's happening with our policy. We're gonna be followed by the seclusion policy, restraint and seclusion policy, which is long overdue. And then we are going to be having quite a bit of presentation and updates on what's happening to the continuity plan around virtual learning, focusing on Q1. We parted out this really large presentation. So there'll be time for folks to do some breaks and have some questions and for us to do discussions. I think because it's a really long presentation, what I'll do is I'll look around on the screen to see how people are showing up, and I'll just kind of give, share the names and just go in that order. And I see that Charisse is already on. So Melissa, whenever you're ready to put the presentation up for us. And Charisse, whenever you're ready to start. Welcome, Charisse. I think this is the first time coming to us. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, your role, and I see Lisa is on. And I think once we have the presentation up and whenever you want to start introducing yourself, and then we can get the presentation going. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. This is my first time before the board, so I am quite excited. For many of you who know me or don't, I'm Charisse Perry. I'm the Associate General Counsel for the Madison School District. And so I'm really excited about some of the modifications that we'll be discussing. Nikki, I know you're probably well versed in these modifications, but I'm sure you're excited to see them come about as well. I know I am, having worked in this field. So I will await, I guess, for the presentation to start, but this is a long time coming. So very, very excited. Okay, so
Great. Thank you, Melissa.
thank you, Melissa. Do I have control, Melissa?
Not currently.
Okay.
Charisse, do you want to move to your slides and we'll
Yeah.
come back when Eric is
Absolutely.
here?
Let's do that.
Okay. So Melissa, if you would just move down to the slides for the restraint and seclusion. Might just be the next one. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's number 3, I think.
Okay.
I have nothing fancy. I'm a lawyer. I don't know how to make any of these things fancy. So again, we're here to talk about Board of Education Policy 4221. And that's the policy that governs our use of restraint and seclusion in our school district for Madison. Why are we here? Well, one, we're here because there's been a change in the law. So for many of you who do know, prior to the spring of 2020, the use of seclusion and physical restraints in schools here in Wisconsin was governed under Act 125. On or about March 4th of 2020, Governor Evers signed Act 118, resulting in changes into Wisconsin Statute Section 118.305 related to seclusion and restraint in schools. And so frankly, we just gotta catch up. Now, the cool thing about this, and I'm going to use that term, I know that's not a professional term, but what makes me really excited is that a lot of these provisions are aligned with the values and the goals of this district, and the same as with the board. And it also applies to both students with and without disability. And so I want people to pay particular attention to these changes because it's not just a SMUB group here in MSD, but it's all students, and really looking at kind of what are some of the changes that we can make in our practices to kind of make sure everybody's at the table when we're discussing the use of these practices in our schools. Can we go to the next slide? Awesome. So a summary of changes really quickly. One of the things that I'm very pleased to see is that the seclusion restraint data will be reported to both you all as the Board of Education, as well as to DPI. And that's something that I think is kind of long overdue. There's nothing to hide here. Whatever numbers we have, if we take them as learning opportunities and to do better. And if we are seeing significant improvements, then yay us, right? But the idea here is that we're transparent with what's happening here in the district, so that we can get better each and every time. Schools to prepare and provide a written report to parents. I am so excited to see this. I think that the goal overall to the changes that's come about under Act 118 is really focused on kind of creating opportunities for developing preventative measures, to looking at strategies of de-escalation, of looking at opportunities to really meet the needs of our students, as well as opportunities to partners with families, and really promoting that transparency. We talk about that and we throw that word around. This is really putting the money where our mouth is, right? Like, it's really making sure that parents are aware of what's happening in our schools. And again, we have nothing to hide here. We want parents to be at the table. The third provision that I think is a significant change is principals and or their designees need to meet with their school staff, including law enforcement, who participated in incidents involving restraint or seclusion, to discuss that incident in great detail and really begin to pull it apart, pick it apart, and develop those strategies to prevent future occurrences. And the most exciting provision that's come about, I had to put it in here. I didn't want to put it as the first one because it's quite scary, but prohibiting the use of prone restraints. I mean, national statistics have shown the impact and the effect it has had on students. And so we're ready to just move and leave that in the past. And I think these provisions are particularly important given the fact that specifically students with disabilities, but students with disabilities of color, specifically Black students, I want to make sure that our families are aware of what's going on so that we can bring them into the table, or bring them to the table, excuse me, to begin to do things better, right? It's all about improving. Next slide, please. So kind of when can seclusion or restraint be used? And I know that some of you already know this, but this is kind of a baseline. And I just like to start with this so that we are all clear on what this is. I think of seclusion or restraint as your last resort interventions. One of the key components here is that a student's behavior has to present a clear, present, and imminent risk to the physical safety of themselves or others. But it's an and here that's so important. It has to be that, and it has to be the least restrictive intervention feasible. This should not be used as a response to a disciplinary concern or for retaliation or any of those other components. It has to be essentially what I call to be the last resort in so many ways or words. Next slide, please. Melissa, you're great at this. What is seclusion? And many of you know this is the involuntary confinement of a student apart from their peers in a room and really in a space, right? It's not confined to a classroom, but in a space from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. I think that's a key component there. Next slide. And then what is a physical restraint? And some of your constituents, which is our parents, our families, our communities, may come to you and say, you know, someone may have been physically restrained. We want to make sure that we're clear on what those terms are. That means the restriction that immobilizes or reduces the ability of a student to move freely, right? It is, in essence, they are not able to move. And so we want to make sure we're not confusing that with a brief touching on the arm, or holding of the hand, or guiding someone to a different area, or even separating a physical altercation. Those things, depending on how it's done, is not considered to be a physical restraint. Now, here's the key pick. You can tell I get excited when I start talking to with my hands. One of the cool things about Act 118 is it really talks about staff training. And I know that our staff always are looking for opportunities to do better, to just be much more skilled. And that's something I definitely applaud all of our staff. So as many of you know, we've had NVCI training, that's the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention training, that's really particularly looking at other types of interventions and de-escalation strategies that can be used in kind of high intensity situations, because that's really when it becomes a little bit challenging, right? When everyone is kind of very, very tense. And a student is very, very tense as well. And so it's in those high intensity situations that we want to make sure that our training is really looking at and reinforcing the use of those preventative measures, those de-escalation strategies, especially ones that are particularized for students with disabilities, right? So when you're talking about certain students with disabilities, there may be certain measures and strategies that are particularly individualized for them in those high intensity situations. That's when that training is so important, that we meet the needs of that student who may or may not be in crisis. Again, talking about prone restraints, which are expressly prohibited, and really making sure that our staff understand that we are not using any maneuvers that causes chest compression or obstructs a circulation or airways. The idea here is that we want to help a student be able to de-escalate. We're not going to use any of these maneuvers, and frankly now it's against the law, which is good, and it was under Act 125 as well. Chemical and mechanical restraints are prohibited. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a different provision that's kind of under that, so that people are clear when I'm saying that's prohibited under a circumstance where it will seem a little bit gray. Next slide, please, Melissa. And so the changes that affect student disabilities in particular, and I really kind of wanted to do a slide on this. Again, I want to make sure that it's clear for our staff, or just for our board as well, that the IEP team must review and revise the IEP as necessary, right? But we want to make sure that the IEP teams are paying particular attention to those positive behavior interventions and supports and strategies that address that specific student's disability-related needs, right? And we want those strategies and interventions to be based on the FBA. So based on a functional behavior assessment that's used to dive deep into kind of the core and to begin to analyze antecedents and really come up with some strategies that we know can work. So very, very exciting about that provision as well. It also gets rid of a requirement that we have to put some silly language in the IEP if a student is thought of to need physical restraint or seclusion. Never liked that language. I thought it almost kind of like created a, if we build it, they will come kind of thing. I don't like that language. So I'm glad that's out of here. Next slide, please, Melissa. So this is really cool provision as well. And this is the required meeting that I spoke about earlier and the summary of changes. It's looking at the principal or the principal designee pulling together all those covered individuals. And I'm talking about everybody who was involved in this particular incident. And that would include law enforcement that was present or and used seclusion or physical restraint, right? To really debrief that matter, dive deep into it, and begin to focus on, again, those de-escalation techniques and positive behavior interventions and strategies so that we do not have a repeated occurrence of use of this particular intervention called restraint or seclusion. Notification requirements, and this applies to all students, so I want to make sure that that's very clear. So whenever there is a use of physical restraint or seclusion on a student by either the covered staff, so our employees, MSD employees, or law enforcement, parents must be notified with no later than 1 business day. Now, we're taking that to a new level, okay? Ideally, and not our best practices is that we want to notify parents of these matters the same day it happens, right? The idea here is that we want to have this conversation with the families about it so that we can begin strategizing and supporting the child, right? That's the focus. So that's the new requirement under Act 118. This is a continuation of the notification requirements. Again, that applies to all students. It basically states that principal or designee must prepare a written report of the incident within 2 business days. So the first requirement, notification of the parent within 1 business day. MMSD is striving to notify parents the same day it happens. This particular requirement is saying that there needs to be a written report within 2 business days following the incident to contain this specific information that we think is always relevant when we're trying to debrief and discuss and then use that information to begin to develop other strategies of support, right? And so this is also particularly important because it has us jot down the names and titles of the covered individuals, including law enforcement who may have been present during that incident. Now, the other key component here, which is what I am really excited about, is that that written report must be tendered to parents within 3 business days of that incident, right? And that makes me really excited because now the onus is not on the families to ask for those reports. We are taking the responsibility under this provision to make sure that families get the report, right? So then we can have an honest conversation about what has happened in our schools and how we're going to make things better. And so this is just, again, a brief overview for those of you who've dove deep into 118. You know, there's a couple other key detailed provisions and changes that are also a part of the modification for 4221. I didn't want to bore you, but these are the highlights that I think are definitely aligned with the values of this district and also aligned with the values of this board. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on what a wonderful opportunity this gives us to really make sure that we're partnering with families and we're being transparent with our families. So, Ananda?
Thank you so much, Reese. And Melissa, can you get us out of, and I know, Nikki, you have to leave, so I really would like for you to have a chance to respond to what we just presented. Melissa, whenever you get a chance to stop the sharing, that'll be great.
Yep. Hang on 1 second.
I have to say, I'm kind of choking up here, and I'm not an emotional person. 17 years ago, when I started writing this bill, when I was in law school with Jeff Spitzer-Resnick, I helped draft the original legislation. Prone legislation, we thought we would never get banned. We never thought that things like seclusion and restraint would be removed from public education. And March 4th was an excellent day. And this is an excellent day for all students. My only comment is please make sure that the training is for everyone as much as possible, because that's incredibly necessary. And two, please define prone using the legislative term as much as possible, because otherwise people use their imagination a little too much. But otherwise, this has been a really, really long time coming. And to those of us who've worked on it for that many years, it's kind of a nice thing to see actually change.
So I have Ali, Savian, Gloria, and Christina Schmidt.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And Nikki, thank you so much for your emphasis of the term prone. So my understanding is that prone means anything where a student is face down or on their chest. Supine would be the opposite of prone, right? A student who would be restrained on their back. Are we advocating for supine versus prone? Or are we saying no prone? And what there, because it's an interesting thing to say what not to do. I'm curious what we are supposed to be doing.
Great. Ananda, can I respond?
Yes, please.
Great. So, Ali, I think that's a great question. And you know, I don't run MVCI, so I'm not going to pretend that I do. But my understanding is that MVCI is a nationally, you know, well-researched, you know, data-driven program, that it has an entire workbook and training. Then we offer a number of trainings throughout the school year. The big one happens in the summer, and then we do refresher trainings. The actual types of maneuvers are very particular and individualized. So it's going to be very difficult for me, and I'm not trying to dodge your question, but it's very difficult for me to say, we're not going to do this one, we're going to do that one. There are no prone restraints, period. So anything where there is those things that are defined in Act 118, the chest compression, the pressure on the neck, the pressure, the not attending to the head and to the neck, even if it doesn't have the word prone in it, if it has any of those components that does any of those things, and Nikki, you correct me if I'm wrong, we're not using them. So, oh, go ahead.
Basically, it was done because of people were suffocating into mats and when pressure was put on the airway, they were running out of air. And unfortunately, it led to some tragic deaths.
No, I completely understand both the positionality of prone and why we would no longer utilize it. And I think it's a great thing. I'm very excited that we are no longer engaging and that we haven't been engaging in restraints that utilize prone positioning. I'm just concerned that alternate positioning, including supine positioning, can run similar risks. And I appreciate your expansive response, Charisse, around this being very specific to the incident and the student and the very specific needs of that young person. And so there isn't a generalized sense of prone is wrong, and therefore this singular positionality is what we are going to alternate with.
Right. It's not one particular type of position. It's any position that does those things outlined in Act 118, you cannot use, no matter what the term is, no matter what the actual maneuver is. And so MVCI has done a lot of research on the types of maneuvers that does not put pressure on the chest, does not cut off someone's airways, so that staff have almost a list, so to speak, that they are trained to deliver, and then they're told which ones are supposed to be delivered under certain circumstances. Now, I don't want to speak to too many specifics, again, because I don't do the MVCI training. That is within the student staff support, I forget the formerly student services, whatever the department Jay Alfeld runs. Brian Holmquist is the coordinator. So he would be able to tell you which ones are used, which ones aren't, which we can definitely give to the board. I think it's really interesting. He's given me a couple of the diagrams, which are interesting, interesting to see.
Okay,
So,
that would be incredibly helpful. So I would really appreciate that follow-up information. Thank you for addressing my question.
yeah.
Thank
Right.
you.
Nanda, could I say one?
Yes, go ahead.
On this, in the hearings, this was stressed, Ali, that it is not to take the place of prone seclusion and prone restraints. We're not replacing one with the other. They made that pretty clear in the testimony, and I hope we stress that as much in this.
Savian and then Gloria.
Yeah, so with the new reporting standards that we'll be implementing, how are we going about communicating that with staff? And what types of accountability should we expect if there's ever an instance that's not reported with the new guidelines?
Oh, great question. So myself, and I mentioned Brian Holmquist, who's the coordinator of, gosh, he's a long title, NVCI training and intensive support IST. That's a long title. So we have a small team that has developed curriculum for staff that will launch during Welcome Back. And it's one of those things that staff should have already been NVCI trained. They are taking our webinar during Welcome Back, and then there's a test at the end of the webinar. If you do not get 100% on that test, you have to do the webinar all over again and then take the test again. So we want 100% proficiency with the test in order to be able to move forward with using any of those types of interventions. And remember, these are last resort interventions. Accountability is also built into this webinar. So for staff who do not take this in the requisite time, we notify them kindly. Within a week after that notification, then we go to their supervisors. They have 2 weeks to complete it. If they don't complete it, then it gets higher up the chain. This is something that we're not gonna move lightly on. We're not taking this lightly. This is really important for all of our staff to know and to master. And it's necessary, right? We're responsible to do this. And so those are the accountability measures, and that is how we're getting the word out. We've also developed a one-pager that's going to go out to all the principals, and this training, a version of this training will be presented on Thursday to all principals at the Legal Services Conference. And so all principals are required to be there. So we're expecting that principals are there, that they're paying attention, and that they're listening. Because again, they will be tested on this information during Welcome Back.
Thank you. Yeah, I can only imagine how jarring it was for a parent to hear it through any other means. So, yeah.
Can we just get a copy of that, if it's possible, of the principal's training information, if possible?
For the Legal Services Conference, Nikki?
Yeah.
I can definitely speak with Sherry about that. I'm just the Associate General Counsel. I'm not the General Counsel.
Understood.
Thank you, Nikki, for that request, and thanks, Savion, for the question. Gloria and Christina Schmidt.
Yeah, Charisse. So in the policy changes, it says covered individual within the policy is any MMSD employee. Is that correct? So that's correct. Okay. It's all MMSD employees that are covered.
Yes. And
Is-
you will
Go ahead.
And you will see if you scroll up to the top for definitions, Act 118 has a specific definition for covered employee and covered individuals. So that will include MSD employees, those under kind of our guise. So student teachers, I believe, is listed there. Law enforcement is not, right? So law enforcement is a separate entity. So I want to make sure that's clear to the board. But the definition, I can't remember the entire definition off the top of my head right now, but that's at the definition section at the very top, Gloria, of the revision that I provided to the board.
Great. And then also for the purposes of the policy, law enforcement is included, right? I mean, as far as the reporting procedures and so forth, right? So if law enforcement officers usually uses physical restraint, they're also included in the process.
So let me just make sure I'm clear. If law enforcement on MSD school grounds, for whatever reason, engages in a physical restraint or seclusion of one of our students, they would be a part of the debriefing. So part of that provision, and in kind of getting through all the information, we would also be having their information part of the written statements and all the information that we take down. So their name, their badge number, so on and so forth. So they are, and we would make that report to the family, just as if one of our MSD employees had restrained or secluded a student. So we would be responsible for reporting that to families, so the families are aware.
Okay.
Is that more? Is
Yep,
that more?
yep, that definitely answers my question. Thank you. And then also, for the training, so it says imminent threat. And so how do we, so a couple questions in that. So how are we gauging what's imminent for the person who is restraining? I mean, how are we going to measure that? And what is imminent for one person, depending on the situation, could be different than the other person. I say this because, I mean, race is a factor, size is a factor. I mean, there are many
Gender.
factors as far as gender, right? I mean, and so what is, how do we determine the imminent threat here as far as the investigation? And maybe I'm going through, but it's just, the reason why policies get me really nervous around this area is because we, when it comes to practice, it sometimes doesn't match up. And I just want to make sure that, we have an answer to that and also training around that.
Yes, no, I completely understand that. I'm grateful for that question. And I think along the lines of you, Gloria, and that, one of the things I think of when I think of equity, for one, is when you're talking about implementation and application of particular policy to one group versus the other, right? And how these definitions apply to one group versus another. I am not, again, I don't do the training for NVCI, so I want to be very mindful of that. My definition of imminent really comes from the supports and the guidance from DPI that kind of has a standard definition for imminent, which I can give to the board. But again, this is not one where this is a perceived apprehension of a threat of that kind. I mean, when we're thinking about imminent, we're really considering something that is going to happen now, to where there is not necessarily like, I'm gonna, it's a verbal threat, and the actual matter is going to happen, is readily happening now, and it's immediate in so many words. And so I think that with the standard definition, which I want to get to you because I want you to see it from NVCI and from DPI, I think that'll be very clear for the board, because that was definitely a question I had when I was even researching to modify. And I'm sorry I didn't memorize that off the top of my head to provide you. But I think it's, when you see that, it's very clear that we want to eliminate a certain amount of, how do I say this? Perception as to what one thinks may be imminent versus another, but we really want to make it to where it is actually a safety, is at that heightened level of a safety concern that it is going to happen now, and which is the reason why these particular interventions are a last resort. I kind of want to give that to you right now. I want to just click off the screen and give it to you right now. But yes, so I will provide you with that definition, Gloria, from both DPI and from NVCI.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then, I mean, I think what's clearly important here is, the policy is important, but clearly how this is implemented every day, and giving the tools and the support of our staff and teachers who are in our schools to actually, train on how this looks every day. And I mean, but it has to be training that includes, the bias, everything, the day-to-day things that our teachers and staff are dealing with, right? In that, to match up with the policy. And so I think that the policy is important. It really gives us a foundation to work off of. But I think what's really going to be important for us is the training and how we incorporate all the complexity around an incident that happens in our schools, particularly when, we are not going to have SROs in our schools, and we need to provide that extra support for our teachers. in staff. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that is an important component. And I think that with our safety and security team that Savi and I will be leading, I think that this is something that we can brainstorm about how we ensure that the protection of our staff and our students and our teachers right around this. Because I agree, I mean, we should only use physical force around if it's an imminent risk, but it's so complex with every situation is different, and we have to
It is.
identify and support our teachers and staff around that, and our students.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Christina?
Thank you, and thank you, Sharice, for this information. It's really helpful. I was really just sort of a comment first. I was really happy to hear you say that, you know, in talking about the one business day, that we really are ideally striving to make sure that we're notifying families the same day that the incident happens, because I think that's really important. So thank you for clarifying that. I also had a question on the training. With the NVCI training, how many staff do we have in each school who are trained in this? And is it required by, depending on the role they play in the school? Do we have teachers who are trained in this, or what is, how does that work?
Yes, that's a great question. Oh, is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just took down a quick note of your question because I don't know the number of staff that are trained, again, because I don't do the training. I don't oversee that. So it's overseen by a different department. However, is my understanding that typically those individuals who worked with students, and this is under Act 125, so it's a little bit different, right? Because now under Act 118, these provisions apply to all students. Right. So this is going to be a little bit different, which is why our training for our webinar is much more expansive, because we're no longer just focusing on kind of special education staff, CC teachers, BEAs, SEAs, folks who typically come as behavior responders, or those who go to assist in high level and high intensity situations. This is something that we would want a much more wider span of staff members to be more familiar with, to understand, and frankly, to be able to implement and know fairly well, right? And so the plan for that, I know that there were a couple of trainings this summer for staff. Now, the staff positions that were invited to that training, Chris, I do not know because I wasn't a part of it, but I would be happy to send these questions along to Brian Holmquist, along with Gloria's questions. Because I think that it would be really helpful for you all to know kind of, and Ali's, the positions that NVCI trains on, what is the definition of imminent, how are staff supposed to be able to identify those student behaviors that present an imminent safety risk to themselves or to others, right? It's easy to make that assumption when a student is in high distress and is banging their head against a wall. It's a little bit different in other circumstances, right? That's much more of a clear, present, imminent. There's no perception or discretionary decision making there. In other situations, it's a little bit more gray. And so trying to kind of figure out how staff are trained to make those quick on-site decisions, I think is helpful, along with your questions right now, which is regards to kind of training and who's involved and when is it gonna, like, how is it taking effect? I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Right.
Chris, before you go, can you remind me of the last question that you had? I was able to jot down too.
The last question that I have beyond the training, and you know, to go along with that, just trying to figure out if we need more training and what, you know, might be needed in that regard. My last question is the seclusion and restraint data has to be reported to the board according to Act 118. And so how does that happen? What's the timeline for that, and when it has to be reported to DPI, and sort of how is it going to get included in what we see, timeline wise?
Yes, so that's a great question as well. So for the seclusion or restraint data, that information is, and I outlined this as also in the policy. So under Act 125, the board received restraint and seclusion data. The difference here under 118 is that you guys are going to get that data a little bit sooner, right? So beginning on October 1st of every school year, we would submit, meaning the district would submit to you, the board, disaggregated data, which basically includes the total number of incidents of seclusion during the previous school year, the total number of students who were involved in incidents of seclusion during the previous school year, also the total number of students with disabilities who were involved in incidents of seclusion during the previous school year, and the total number of students with disabilities who were involved in physical restraints, right? So we can really then pull apart the total number of students in which these particular interventions were applied, and the total number of students with disabilities who were also involved in incidents involving in these two particular interventions as well. Annually, beginning December 1st of every year, obviously I said annually, the board in the district on your behalf will probably submit that to the state superintendent, DPI. And so those are the two timelines that will be specific in here for Act 115. Oh, excuse me, 118, excuse me. I have a lot of acts in my head. 118 here. So you're looking at October 1st and December 1st.
Okay, thanks. That helps.
And that's the data that you'll be getting.
Lisa,
Okay.
do you have something to add to that?
I just
Lisa?
wanted to say Brian Holmquist just joined us. Sharice, if there are questions about training, he just joined the board meeting, and I think he would be happy to answer some of those questions, Sharice, that you took down.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that'd be great. I just wanted to say that just a couple of things before we turn into Brian. Along with the report and whatever other information we're submitting to the board, I think it'll be a really good added resources is the frequent asked questions from the department, because it does have some of the I think the district has a history to always go above and beyond what the law says. So the law says in regards to training, for example, is at least one staff is trained, and then schools per school. But all districts must maintain all the records. So I think it's important to also to have what is DPI requesting, but how much we are going beyond what the law expects. So Brian, there were quite a bit of questions around training. I don't see you, Brian. Did you turn your camera on, or are you?
I don't see me.
Hi. I'm just gonna say one thing before you start. Can you tell us what is your title? Because Sharice just totally butchered your title. Let's start with that.
Okay. So my name is Brian Holmquist. I'm the coordinator of intensive supports and critical response.
Thank you, Brian. So there were questions. Sharice, do you have the questions written down? I have them a few here. Do you want to just?
Yeah. Sure.
Start?
So we received the first question I have jotted down, and Ali, correct me if I'm wrong. The one I jotted down was from Ali. And one of the questions was Act 118 expressly prohibits prone restraints. And Ali just wanted to wanted to know what other types of restraints NVCI would likely train staff, just to make sure that we're not saying that one particular restraint is prohibited, but yet we're going to do this other restraint, and that other restraint may pose some of the same harmful conditions as prone restraints. Did I get that right, Ali?
Yeah. I basically said the opposite of prone is supine. Are we moving away from prone restraint into utilizing supine restraint? So students not being face down while being restrained, but instead being on their backs while being restrained. And Sharice spoke to a variety of positions, and that information could be shared with us, so we had a more expansive understanding of what that looks like. If you wanted to give us a little more information, I think it'd be incredibly helpful.
Sure. So in our foundational training, which is the training that we provide for our mandated staff, covers both disengagement skills and holding skills. And within the category of holding skills, all of the techniques that we have there are actually all techniques that are when an individual is either standing or sitting. There are some additional training that us as trainers have received, recognizing that there are some students where they pose a significant safety risk to themselves or others, and we're not able to safely engage in a holding skill in one of those positions. So for example, there might be a student that goes to the floor and causes additional harm to themselves, where we're wanting to help prevent that from happening. Those are some of those advanced techniques that we go in and problem solve uniquely to that student and with that team connected to that student. So in that example, previously in the advanced skills, we had one holding skill, which was the supported prone position, which doesn't apply any pressure to the back, neck, all of those other areas. However, it will not be an item or an option for us going forward, given this change. There's also an assisted supine position, as you're talking about, where the individual would then be face up, laying basically on their back, and individuals then are helping to control or limit the motion of their legs and arms, and also providing protection for their head to make sure that they're not causing additional injury with their head.
Thank you.
It's important to note that all of the training that goes above and beyond the foundational training is very unique and specific to that individual student and their team. We're not providing that training just broadly, because they are techniques that we really want to make sure that any contraindications from a health standpoint or other aspects are taken fully into account before that team is using any other techniques.
Just so that I want to be clear in that, is that when Brian's talking about training to a specific group, we're talking about training to engage in using physical restraints, not necessarily training about what Act 118 requires and what the definitions are for restraint seclusion. So those are two different things, and I want to make sure the board is clear on that. Brian, Gloria had a question I have written down here. Wanted to know the definition of imminent and how staff were trained on how to identify when a student's behavior reaches the threshold of clear, present, and imminent safety threat to themselves or others. Gloria, did I get that correct?
Yeah, so that's an, if regardless of 118, 125, we still had that same definition. And
Yes.
Over time, we were able to learn by looking at DPI complaints and decisions over time of how are they looking at defining some of those elements. And so what we've found through some of those different cases that have gone to DPI and their published outcomes, they've defined it as something that is going to happen shortly in the future. However, they added the piece of you don't need to wait. I use the example for my fist to hit Sharice's face before you can intervene. It's the idea that there is the anticipation of it coming next. And so that was one of the DPI rulings, which was very specific in helping us understand how they look at imminent, and it can also look at patterns of behavior. So for example, if in the scenario from DPI, it was a student was using a paintbrush to jab or stab at their neighbor, and previously they've had history of doing that same thing with pencils and scissors and a variety of other pieces. And so staff intervened prior to that person causing harm to their peer, and DPI came back and indicated that was an appropriate use given the pattern of the history. And in that moment, they didn't need to wait for it to happen before they could intervene. That's been the closest that DPI has come to giving us the definition of imminent.
Mm-hmm.
And we could provide those published cases to the board if the board finds that will be helpful, just to review it from your own eyes and, you know, be able to examine and inspect it for yourself and have additional questions.
Yeah, and then Sherry, the other part of that question was the consideration of what is imminent to one person may be different for another. And how did you, Brian, in any of the cases and research around how that plays out as far as, you know, bias, size, gender, all that stuff? Is that included in your consideration?
There are elements of that are definitely interwoven into the larger context of MVCR, nonviolent crisis intervention training, that captures different elements that you're kind of speaking to of are there ways in which that you're ensuring that from your team approach that you're looking at where is that threshold and how is it that you can recognize escalation doesn't always mean imminent risk to physical safety. One of the DPI decisions over time had to do with the idea of, was there time to intervene differently? So for example, a student that's running out into traffic is imminent and it's significant and happening now versus the idea of you're still in maybe a verbal escalation. However, there's distance between you and the individual. You're able to get other individuals out of the space. You might even be able to get yourself out of that space, and helping people recognize that those variables within each situation or scenario are the items that dictate what it is that you should be doing to, one, minimize restraint or seclusion at all costs, as well as de-escalation.
And thank you for reminding me of that second portion of your question, Gloria, because I think one of the things I didn't think about when you first asked me is that Brian had informed me that there was members of his team that part of their training was really infusing some of the equity components that have been developed by the larger department in the training. So really looking at kind of how components of race plays a role in some of these measures. And so I think that that's also important to note that based upon this district strategic framework, the idea of race in particular, but looking at gender and looking at additional components, that those things are also very much so considered in your trainings. Isn't that right, Brian? Some of your teams have definitely taken some of the equity training and infused it within the MVCI training as well?
Yeah, there are elements that are in the training from CPI, Crisis Prevention Institute, which is an international organization. And one of our reasons for shifting from our homemade version of what we used to do a few years back to moving into this more international model is one, they continually update it with evidence-based practices. They've connected it to positive behavioral interventions and supports. They've connected it to trauma-informed practices. So there's a whole host of things that they continue to interweave into the training, in addition to how it is that we as a training team within MMSD connect this with the larger work that we're doing as a district and organization. And so those are some of those pieces from a foundational training standpoint, as well as when we go in to work with either individual school teams or whole school cohorts. There are times that we've gone out to help schools understand how to pull their relevant data at the school level and be able to dig into that to figure out how is it that they're taking equity as a lens to be able to analyze that information and what are the action steps that they take from that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Brian, if you can speak a little bit closer to the microphone. I don't know if it's just me that it's hearing you a little bit softer. I just wanted to do a follow-up on that because the DPI information around who gets to consider what is dangerous or not is whoever the person that is interacting, which might not be the person in the team. I think that just kind of Gloria's question making even more relevant that every staff needs to be really understanding of the implications of their own biases around interacting with students. I have a couple follow-ups, one in regards to communication to parents. So one of the questions that I get a lot on my day job is parents wanting to know what can they be advocating for, right? What is they often ask like, is it okay that this horrific thing that happened to their children, right? Because they don't even know, they have some hint of like, oh, this might not be okay. And so I'm curious about how communication to parents, in particular about those changes, but just overall around the rights for their parents. And I'm speaking like mostly around now the fact that their level of communication, their timeline for communication, and what can they do if that is not happening at their school.
Teresa, I'm not sure if you've answered that previously or if you want me to answer.
No, I haven't answered it. This is Ananda's first question, but
Yeah,
either one of us can go. I
Okay.
think we both have the same answer.
Yeah, sure. Although you have up to 1 business day for that first notification, it is ideal and best practice to have that notification happen the day of an incident happening. And likely it's best to have that happen before the end of the school day. So you're able to effectively communicate to a family member of like,
Right.
This is what.
So Cherise covered that part. My question is around like how are parents know that that's their right? Now it has shifted, right? That's
right. That's the question. So I think that there's a couple of components. One, we don't have anything going out to parents as of yet. Again, our focus for our small team, and it's just a few of us, was working on making sure that staff were aware of this, principals were aware of this Thursday, and then we were launching the professional learning that's going to happen for Welcome Back. This is a good question, I think, for our small team, Brian, to consider about what would be our outreach to families so that they also understand this process. And it's funny that you mentioned this because before this became bigger, I had conversations with communications about how we can communicate with families regarding some of these pieces. And so I think with this question, Ananda, I think that's something that's definitely back on the table because I think it's helpful for parents in order for them to be at the table and to be strong participants. They got to know kind of what the provisions are and what the rules are. And even if it's directing them to the DPI website and some other provisions, at least that's better than nothing, and preparing them to be able to be active participants in this process. So I think that that's definitely something Brian and our team can really consider as the next phase. Thank you, Ananda, for bringing it to our attention.
no problem. I have one more, and maybe it's a part question, part comment. A lot of people, and I'm really sad that Nikki had to leave earlier for another commitment, because I know her and I have had lots of conversations about this. A common misconception is people think that law enforcement are also abiding by the same act of protections, right? And it's not the case. Are we looking into strategies for, in particular to MPD or the staff to also being able to support them and how to communicate with law enforcement around the needs of different students and how we're doing, how are we navigating, and how, if you have any thoughts now, it'd be great. If not, that's too sort of just a place of opportunity. It's totally fine as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a place of opportunity for us to think more. Again, kind of what was on our plate for the initial launch of the school year. But I do think this is very critical as SROs are no longer in our schools, right? So when police are coming to our schools, Under policy 44, they're coming in two ways. One, they either have a warrant of some kind in which they have probable cause to come into these schools, or we are calling them for additional assistance because there's a matter that our staff are not able to contain. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk a little bit about, and this is probably something that we would need to speak with the safety and security team on how we are making sure that people are aware of the provisions under Act 118 and that it applies to all students. So remembering that, right? Not just students with disabilities anymore. So looking at kind of what are some of those measures and what those protocols should look like. I think that's a great opportunity for some learning for us for the upcoming school year. Gosh, you're full of
Yes, I'm super excited that like all my colleagues had some really amazing questions. I want to give the two of you, Sharice and Brian, any last opportunities for any final thoughts or comments. And there's a none. I wanted to get Eric for the Title IX presentation.
I just want to thank you all for having me. Chris, I did not forget about your questions so that you know that that's on the forefront. And Brian, I'll talk to you a little bit more about what I have jotted down from Chris, because I didn't think we got an opportunity to really address that because her questions was really onto the how many staff were actually trained and that kind of particular questions, but we can probably get that to the entire board. I think that'd be good for the entire board to see. But thank you. And Brian, unless you have something else.
No, unless there's another question that you want me to respond to now, I can hold off and we can get that information to you later.
Well, I think I can speak for everyone that we really appreciate all the work and this heavy lifting around this policy change, but also the research behind and also the rolling out, the implementation of this work. So we really appreciate your team's work on this.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Sharice. I think I called you Sharice earlier. So Sharice, thank you.
Yeah, it's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharice. Thank you, Brian. And then it's Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Melissa, whenever you're ready to put us again. And then Eric, Melissa, I'm going to step out for a minute to something's happening on my Zoom and then log back in.
Sounds good.
But I'll wait for the presentation to.
All right, let me get it going here.
So I'll come up, I'll say hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to step in here. For those who don't know, I'm the Affirmative Action Officer, Title IX Coordinator, Contract Compliance Coordinator for the district in Legal Services Department. And Melissa, you can just bring the whole slide up. It ends with the word constitutional. So the reason I'm here is that some of you may be aware that the Office of Civil Rights has issued a new Title IX rule. So as it says, the Title IX was passed in 1972. The first regulations were passed in 75. The second regulations were passed a couple months ago. And the original regulations focused mainly on higher ed and gave discretion on how to handle things. And Title IX is specific around sexual harassment. And now these new rules are focused both on K-12 and higher ed, and they're extremely prescriptive. The rule with the regulations are over 2,000 pages as a Word document. And so they're effective and enforceable August 14th, 2020. The reason we're coming forward is we don't have a policy at the moment. And the reason we don't have a policy for you is there are multiple court cases fighting this rule for a variety of reasons. And so there's an injunction right now regarding there's one of the court cases that's asking for an injunction to halt the effective date until it goes into place. And the judge heard it a week ago and he took the final briefs today. So I'm not sure when he's going to issue his decision about whether this is going to be stalled before the effective date or not, but obviously before August 14th. Additionally, there's a number of court cases challenging different aspects of it as whether it's constitutional or not. And so I'm coming forward to let you know that we're aware of it. We've read through it. We're figuring out how we're going to follow through on it. We want to avoid coming to you every single month with a new policy as it works its way through the courts and parts of it might be ruled unconstitutional. And so when that gets figured out, we're to come forward with a policy. At the same time, the district currently has 2 non-discrimination policies. One is for students and one is for staff, families, and volunteers. Those policies are still effective and still stay there. One of the challenges with this rule is they have narrowed the definition of sexual harassment, but that applies for Title IX. The state rule, how we normally look at sexual harassment, the broader definition still applies. So that's part of the reason the other policy will still stay in place. So this is sort of just coming forward, letting you know in case you've heard about it, we're aware of it, we're working through it, and this is why we don't have a policy at the moment. But we will be bringing one forward once it sort of works its way through the court. And that's why I came forward today.
Thank you so much, Eric. I want to give folks a quick opportunity to share. So Christina Schmidt, Savian, Gloria, and Ali. Any questions or comments? Hold on, because I can't see everybody. Melissa, whenever you can to take it out for me. Okay. Hearing none. Eric, anything else?
Nope, not at the moment. Just like I said, we'll be compliant because we have to with the federal law, and we'll bring the policy once it gets sort of exactly figured out what it is. The law.
Thank you so much, Eric, for giving us this update and for also always being like doing a due diligence, making sure that we are in compliance, but also give us like a critical analysis about what's happening both at the federal level or anything in the state level that we should pay attention to. Really appreciate all your work.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. So I think Lisa is going to kick us off on the continuity plan for virtual learning Q1. Again, just wanted to share with my colleagues, it's a large presentation. We chunked it out. I'll do the same thing with a round robin, trying to get your questions concise and clear so we can not be here for a long time. But thank you so much, Lisa and Lisa's team for doing all this planning. There's a lot more. There was a lot that we learned over the summer. There's a lot more information coming because some of the pieces that we're gonna get are abbreviated in regards to the survey, in regards to even the current lessons that both Lisa and the team and all the staff are reviewing. So we're going to get more updates as the time comes. And I think the one thing that I will start, and Lisa, you go ahead, and Melissa, whenever you're ready to pull the presentation up as well, is to say that all the work that it's been done from the time that we close our school buildings to now has helped us to learn how to do instruction during pandemic. So I think nothing has gone to waste. There's been a lot of lift and a lot of learning, a lot of adjusting. I think that's like a really good word to describe where we are. And there's still more to come as we continue to learn about both our limitations, what are some of the things that have worked. I think we have talked before, Madison is along with a small number of districts that have a complexity of having a lot of staff and a lot of students. So we take those things into consideration very seriously. So Lisa, whenever you're ready, and Melissa, thank you for working the technology for us tonight.
Lisa's going to take the presentation
perfect
for this one.
Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Lisa.
Melissa, just tell me what I need to do when it gets up there.
You need to share the screen.
Hang on one second.
Okay. So while we're waiting for Melissa to get that all straightened out, thank you, Melissa. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Jane for her leadership and for her presence this year. Jane, I have loved every minute of partnership with you. I have learned from you. You hired me 19 years ago, and I still have learned from you every day we have worked together. So I just want to say much love to you. We will miss you, and I'm very thankful we have had this year together.
Thank you, Lisa. I do appreciate that. And I feel the same way about working with you and the senior team. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jane. So Ananda, I also want to thank you for your work on this. This is nothing short of a lot of content, and I want to thank you also for your guidance and your just working with me to figure out how to get this all moving. And I think that I just appreciate your perceptions in anticipation of questions that could come up. So just really want to thank you for working together and the ways of working that we've established as well. I'd also like to, if Kaylee Jackson could put her face up on, her beautiful face up on camera here. This is our new Curriculum and Instruction Executive Director. Kaylee, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa.
Kaylee has been with us since June 10th. She has jumped right in and is sharing her brilliance and talents and passion for the work and for equity. And we are just so proud to have you with us. And all of you on the board will get a chance to hear Kaylee talk about the work that she has been leading over the summer. So thanks, Kaylee, for being here.
Thank you, Kaylee, for being here, and welcome. Welcome to the team.
Thank you, Ananda.
Glad you were able to join us. And thank you, Lisa. And you're saying thank you to everybody, but I'm going to say, Lisa, this is not her last day. She's like saying goodbye, like this is the worst day. We keep Lisa for a little longer.
I was thinking too, I'm like, where is she going?
No.
Just a lot of people to be grateful for, you know, I mean, it's a lot going on here. So yeah, just had to get that off my chest. So anyways, we're going to talk about the instructional continuity plan tonight. And to use the words of Ananda when we talked about this work has really stretched us. It has really stretched our minds and challenged us. And not a minute has gone by as we have had starts and stops and working with the Department of Health, working with DPI, sort of thinking about different scenarios. We have learned from everything we have problem solved around. And what we're going to share with you tonight is a high level summary of the instructional continuity plan, which is actually a plan that could serve the district in other circumstances where school may be shut down. But this plan is serving us right now during the COVID pandemic. And the plan has been put together based on lots of voices, based on what we have heard from our surveys, from how staff and families and children have experienced virtual learning, what we learned last year when we got virtual learning up and running in 3 weeks and brought children and families back and got hotspots and internet access out there. We'll share with you some learning that we did over summer in our summer school programs. We'll share that a little bit about we'll share that a little bit about that. And then we'll also share the work and the learning that a group of 150 staff members has come together to coalesce around as we begin virtual learning. 150 people, staff members, teachers, central office, voices of parents and students have really put their thought and their time into best practice resources moving forward to support teachers. What I think you'll see is that the work that we're doing is very focused for the fall. We are focusing on the priority standards for students that are required to accelerate learning. And I say this all the time, this is not about remediation. That is an equity trap. This is about accelerating, and it's going deeper into those priority standards that are at grade level that we know children deserve to experience. How we're moving into the fall, we think is actually an opportunity to get it right, an opportunity to continue the deep learning that has happened in the district, but also an opportunity to not exacerbate the gaps that currently exist. So that is sort of a preamble for this. Now, Melissa, give me my
control.
next. I'm controlling.
I'll control. You're good.
Oh, you're controlling. Okay, next slide. Thank you, my dear. Okay, so our outcomes for today are to provide a high-level overview of our, as I said, fall reentry and recovery plan. We'll talk a little bit about the scenarios that we considered that I know you already are familiar with. Andrew is going to talk a little bit about the data we collected and give a summary of the survey data that we have that will give you a peek into what the full evaluation will be in August. Kaylee's going to go over the teaching and learning acceleration plan from the instructional side of the house. And then Kelly and team are going to talk about MSCR CARES camps, our summer review, and then what we have planned for the fall. Next slide, please. So as we reopen schools in the fall, we're preparing really for 3 scenarios, and we need to be flexible and fluid, knowing that based on what happens with the science of this COVID and the safety that we need to put first, we need to be prepared to come back either all in person, in a hybrid model, in whatever form or fashion, or all virtual. And as you know, we're going back for first quarter in an all virtual setting, and we will continue to reevaluate that and see if we can actually do something different at the end of first quarter that might involve a more hybrid model and integrate some face-to-face. Next slide, please. So as I said, an all virtual start. And we wanted to share a little bit. We know that the board was curious about how summer school went, what our reflections were about summer school, and what some of the lessons taught us about how we experienced that. Next slide, please. So we found some strengths across the levels, and I want to really thank Nicole Schaefer and also Caroline for their work launching summer school. It's like launching a whole nother school district in the summer with thousands of students. So we did some reflecting and some after action reviews, and these are the things that we found that were strengths. The common platforms that we used and that teachers used, there was great commonality and ease of using those and also providing professional development. There was a common, consistent curriculum with expectations and sort of guideposts around what should be used. Zoom was used for multiple groupings, whole group and small group, and some screencasts were saved for that asynchronous instruction. Cross-categorical ESL and bilingual support was critical to the support and success of the summer program. And also the collaboration that was required that grade level teams engaged in with their coach was very intentional and really built into the weeks of summer school. There was also dedicated outreach time and weekly communication to families that was more robust than what we experienced in the spring. So the next slide is identifying what some of our common challenges were. And as we're listening to these slides, and as you're all listening for how will fall be different, know that some of these challenges we identified are what informed some of our ways of working moving into the fall. So we experienced some things we knew we could improve upon or do differently or better. And you're going to see that in some of these initial slides. So some of the challenges were ongoing student engagement in keeping students engaged in consistent programming. We also struggled a little bit with daily attendance expectations and defining what being present really means. So you'll hear from Jay later on in the presentation about how we're changing our attendance policy and tightening that up a little bit. We heard that there was some challenges around family training to support their child at home learning. And we experienced some learning around contact information when families have questions. What kind of outreach would help families to understand the summer learning experience? You'll hear us say multiple times today that student feedback, providing student feedback and gathering student feedback is something we are really leaning into in the fall. And that's something we learned in the summer, that was a challenge for us. We had some of these tech issues around hardware, internet access that we're always trying to sort out. And then we learned that there's much more front loading that has to happen with families before the experience really begins. Next slide, please. So along with the learning that we did in summer school, Andrew is going to chime in here and talk about some stakeholder feedback that we gathered that will be used to strengthen virtual learning in the fall. So I am going to turn it over to Andrew for the next group of slides.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Folks, we're sharing gratitude at the outset of this section, so I'll add to that. I can't help myself. First of all, very grateful to the research program evaluation crew. They were the driving force behind the survey results that you'll see here, and some results that you'll see also at the end of this month as part of a broader evaluation. But also grateful that I'm part of a district that recognizes the need for changes. If we are going to be improving student outcomes, we'll have to engage in some change. And it's important that we get it right. So many of the decisions that we're making and many of the things that you're seeing here tonight are driven, of course, by education science, by health science. But in addition to that evidence, we also need to know that what we're doing is going to meet the needs of our families and aligns to the experiences of our families and our students and our staff. So we fielded a series of surveys following our closure in mid-March, and only recently closed the most recent version. The first one we're going to talk about is our shorthand for it is the virtual learning survey, and this is the first screen for that. We fielded this survey to help understand those experiences of students and staff and families in this new virtual learning environment. And we got over 6,000 responses from families, nearly 6,000 for students, and 1,300 teacher responses. So a very good participation in these surveys. And what you're seeing here is a very, very high level summary of this. If you do want more information, there's a link at the bottom that gives you additional PowerPoint slides. But then also, as I described, you're going to see a larger evaluation of the virtual learning experience that draws in additional data, additional experiences. But this is a combination of quantitative and qualitative evidence, just to hit a few highlights for you this evening. Next slide, please. So first then, family feedback. We've got a pull quote on the side that we thought was useful. I'll just read the stem of it. Was, we know there was little time to get it together, but the rollout was challenging. So very much recognition that we were under very extenuatingly challenging circumstances, did quite a lot right, and there's still quite a lot that we could improve upon. Some of the things that families provided in terms of feedback: clear expectations and flexibility in providing our services virtually for their students. Also they desired more accessible and user-friendly systems, and then help understanding those systems for helping their students and monitoring their progress from home. And then emphasizing also the frequent communication from staff and from teachers. This was supported by, it was across the board really. The desire for greater communication is linked to other outcomes like satisfaction and sense of community, sense of belonging. Next slide, please. The student feedback, the STEM we have here, I think that the virtual learning experience could include more information and instructions about how the assignment should be executed. So we saw this in the qualitative evidence as well as the quantitative evidence, where students then asked for greater structure and clearer articulation about what was expected from them in this virtual environment. Also looking to increase the frequency of contacts that they have with staff and teachers and with their peers. And then making sure that that content is meaningful, that communication is meaningful, and that they're provided with good instructional feedback on the work that they're doing. And the next slide, please. As for teacher feedback, the quote stem here is provide much more professional learning and training around what it means to participate, lead, and facilitate virtual learning. So some more detail on the evidence then from the teachers requesting more frequent consistent communication about expectations for both teachers and for students, emphasizing the need for coherent and high quality curricula. And lastly, very clear, wishing for really clear articulation of what's mandatory and what is really expected for participation and holding students to very high standards. The next slide, please. One of the surveys we fielded was around need for internet access and devices that then fed into some of the actions that Chad's team undertook. I'm filling in for Chad Weezy on this slide. The quote stem here, because it was something we had to do because of COVID-19. I think the district did everything they could to ensure that students had the technology they needed. So learning from some of these lessons and learning from the work streams we put in place and replicating them into the school year, next school year, all students K-12 would be issued a Chromebook, and we're exploring options for 4K. Regarding internet access, very serious needs were identified when we did go virtual. We will continue to make hotspots available for those students in need of reliable access. Some outdoor hotspots at some schools could also increase access. And our data plans are currently covered through December of this year, and we'll have to take a look at additional costs for contracts and data plans for those. And then the safe delivery of Chromebooks, this really underscores that we cannot do this work by ourselves. So partners at Badger Bus really helped us do those home-based deliveries to ensure people were safe and that students were getting the devices that they needed. The next slide, please. Another survey that we fielded, we kind of shorthanded as the intentions survey. So we sent this survey to families, asking them what sort of instructional models they would align to, which ones they would most likely participate in. So the series here then is results from that survey. Same thing applies. There is a link to greater detail out on the RPEO website, and we'll revisit this also during the virtual learning evaluation. Now, the very first question we asked families was, what are your plans for enrolling your child or adult student in the district? 97% said we would be enrolling our students. 3% did not. Now, one thing I'll point out is the response rate on this is about 45%. So consider about half of our families have replied. That means that anytime you see a number here, it's possible that it would double between this sample and reality. So when you see a percentage, you can apply 3% to our current enrollments. If you look instead at a number, you may want to double that to give you a ballpark idea of where we're going. But about 3% saying that they would not be enrolling in MMSD conforms to a national poll that I came across indicating exactly the same percentage of families that would be looking for alternatives. Wanting to dig deeper into what that 3% actually meant, we asked, if you fall into this category, what might your plans be? So we have 109 students in this sample, and again, about half of our sample. This may be doubled in terms of reality. About 109 students looking for a homeschooling solution, 93 looking for a virtual school to transfer to or transfer to another district, 82, and then 69 families indicating a preference then for a private parochial school. So these would be families' intentions at the time that we fielded this survey in the mid to late July window. So we do know that families do have some choice in the market, and this may be how they exercise that choice. The next slide, please. Now, regarding kind of appetite, interest, likelihood to join a particular model, we gave families the opportunity to respond to each of these models independently. So these are not mutually exclusive. So if you try to add these up, it's not 100%. A family could check each of these 3 boxes and indicate their preferences. What we found was 78% of our respondents indicated that they would favor an all virtual or would participate quite willingly in an all virtual program. So in that respect, we're very much reflecting in our decision to go all virtual for Q1, aligning to families' mindsets in this mid to late July window. And really a close second, then 72% saying a hybrid model where 2 days in a building, for example, per week would be something that they would gravitate to. And less than half then saying an all-person environment or all-person experience was going to be their top choice. Next slide, please. What's driving some of these desires for all virtual? About call it 8,300 or just over 8,000 or 8,000 responses. About a quarter had indicated that they have a serious health concern for a child or a family member, which is likely driving their concerns, likely driving some of their preference. So again, you can count on about a quarter of our results for the entire district based on this sample. And if you're looking to use the number, 2,200 could be closer to 4,000. And these are families that are expressing a concern around a serious health condition that would lead to complications should they contract COVID-19. And the next slide, please. So as for next steps, this survey had also included questions around transportation needs and childcare needs. We won't get into them today. Our first major step is comparing those results to historic demand to see where those shifts may have occurred to help those two services plan for childcare beginning even in Q1, and then transportation services when a hybrid model would come online. We'd also use these results to monitor changes in enrollment patterns. So where might we see pockets of concern that would need some additional challenge, some additional efforts or some additional outreach. And then when possible, use these to inform outreach, as I just mentioned. It's important to know that these are tools to help us identify trends, to help us identify general direction for planning purposes on the macro level, even on the school level. However, it is not the same thing as an enrollment process. So it's a long way to say, if you mark yes to a survey at the end of July that you need a bus ride, we still need to go through the act of confirmation of that need to get a student a bus ride. Because we sure wouldn't want to make decisions going the other direction was, well, geez, you didn't mark box in July, I guess you don't need a bus ride. You actually have to have an exhaustive enrollment process, student by student, to get us there. This process is very, very similar to how we had used the technology surveys to get a general idea to plan, and then really had to go and confirm individual student needs. So again, more information is on the RPEO website, and I'll pause there. If there are questions, we could field them now or later. But let's pause there to see what our needs are.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And then can you just start us out just real quick, the timeline of the question, in particular, the question around the preference of virtual learning versus in person, and the concern around it actually happened before this last uptick in cases, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So, I just wanted to point that out, that like I know I can hear anecdotally that concern has increased in our community because of the cases. Were you going to say something else about that?
No, it is really important to consider the context of time for this and what is known. And again, knowing what the evidence is that's out there is one thing, but knowing what people's needs, experiences, feelings, emotions, safety levels are really something we also have to take into account. So it makes something like this a pretty powerful survey.
So I'm gonna go Gloria, Ali, Christina, and Savian.
Ananda, I didn't have my hand raised, so.
Oh, no, because it's like easy for me to just go around. So if you don't have it right now, Ali and then Savian and I'm sorry, Ali and then Christina and Savian.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ananda. Andrew and Lisa, thank you so much for speaking to virtual learning. Specifically, I just wanted to thank Lisa, who's really come alive in this process of creating virtual learning opportunities, which has been so beyond impressive, in part because this has been an incredibly stressful time and a really challenging time, and you have used it to champion equity and to evolve our way of thinking about the way our young people learn. And we cannot thank you enough for all of your work. It's been tremendous to get to watch, and I am very excited to hear us move away from concepts of remedial learning and into spaces of accelerated learning and additional support around core areas of learning. So thank you all for all of your work, and huge shout out to you, Lisa. You have been a tremendous champion for equity along the way of virtual learning.
Thank you, Ali. Appreciate that.
Chris?
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. I guess one of the questions I have for Andrew is, as we go through this and we know that situations are changing in the community with health concerns and things that are happening, how often are we planning to survey our families and our staff as we go forward to sort of get a sense of where we're at and where we're going forward? Do we have a plan for that yet, or are we sort of trying to be flexible with that, or how do you see it looking?
Well, I'll reference our first post Q1 decision point. So if we're going to be looking at going back to classrooms after the end of October, we're going to want to give families opportunities to plan for such a thing, 2 to 3 weeks. As part of our understanding of where the kind of climate of our community might be, we would probably want to consider some sort of a poll, some sort of a check on where folks' comfort levels would be close to the end of September into early October to make sure that we would have those results in hand to help inform that decision. So that would probably be our next major opportunity or reason to go out and field a survey, kind of like the intention survey that you'd seen today.
Okay, thank you. And then one of the things, just building off of the survey and what you put up there for staff, one of the things I saw that staff are asking for PD around, how to do instruction virtually and how to actually make that happen. So I guess one of my questions, and maybe we'll get to this later in the presentation, so if it happens later, just let me know, but how are we, I guess, differentiating for different levels of staff experience and comfort with virtual instruction? And yeah, how is that going to look both in supporting staff and then also, families asking for the same level of support and information around how to support their students?
Yeah, I think, Lisa, you have slotted to have a pretty extensive teacher training, teacher support. Is that okay to move that to the next part?
So we'll get at that later.
Correct. And if we don't answer, Chris asked again, if it wasn't clear enough, but we're going to get into some of that with Jorge's overview of professional development and also just the overview around roles and responsibilities and Nichelle's work for family community engagement.
Okay, sounds great. I'll just wait then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for your question. And Savian?
You mentioned how important student feedback was over the summer, or Lisa mentioned how we can really improve our student feedback and outreach. I'm wondering about the possibility of a survey for students.
Yeah, the virtual learning survey did include students, and I think that we have a much more captive audience with them once we're in Q1. We could look at options for fielding a similar kind of intentions survey for students, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I know that that's something that our student liaison has brought to our attention pretty regularly around how to engage students more intentionally. So if there's no more questions, I wanted to really share thank you, Andrew, for always trying to think ahead and really also getting yourself retooled about what's happening and how to push this really important surveys, and also being really flexible about pulling the survey and giving us pretty immediate responses because giving an analysis takes longer than a week to and you have turned around that pretty fast. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. And I'll be around in the background. If anything else comes up, I'm here. And as always, you can send us questions, and Oriana and I'll respond best we can.
Thank you. And thank you, Oriana.
Thank you.
Lisa, do you want to move to the next part? And then Melissa, you're going to pull us up? Oh, Kylie, were you going to say something?
Kaylee is actually going to lead us through the next section.
Kaylee, sorry, I missed your next part. Are you sharing your screen?
Lisa, are you?
Kaylee is going to lead us through the next accelerating teaching and learning section, where she'll be talking about some of the main points of our acceleration plan. And then Jorge is going to follow up with the professional development that goes with it. So Kaylee, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And I know Lisa had mentioned before that I was leading this work, and thank you for the accolades. But I'm very much co-leading the work. This is a huge task, and it has been nothing but just really rewarding to join this team and to join it in this work together. So thank you, Lisa, and the rest of the team. You can go ahead on to the next slide, please. All right, so one of the things that we really learned from virtual learning 1.0 and from our summer school experience was the need to really have continuity in experience and expectations throughout our schools. And so we're getting that continuity through a couple different ways. Number one, we are ensuring that we have continuity in the teaching platforms that students and families and teachers will be experiencing. So 4K will be using Ready Rosie and Seesaw. K5 will be using only Seesaw, and then 6 through 12 will be using Google Classroom. We also knew that we need to have some more consistent communication platforms from student to teacher, teacher to family, so on and so forth. So we will be utilizing Zoom for all synchronous learning and using email and Google Hangout and Google Hangout chat for all communications between staff, and then email with our families for a more formal communication channel. And then we also really needed to look at obviously our roles and responsibilities as we go into virtual learning 2.0. And we needed to ensure that we created a consistent message around what central office's role is in virtual learning 2.0. How do we support schools and teachers in a different and more effective way? What do roles and responsibilities now look like for instructional coaches, teachers, so on and so forth? There are, of course, roles and responsibilities that will remain the same, but because we are going into a virtual learning experience, there are certain roles and responsibilities that would need to change outside of being simply in brick and mortar buildings. So we were really sure to create continuity, particularly in those three areas. Next slide. So we knew that this approach going into fall really needed to accelerate learning. And we know that regardless of how we return to school, whether it's virtual or hybrid, what have you, that we need to focus on this idea of acceleration. As Lisa said before, this is not about remediation. We're not doing that. That's an equity trap. And so our focus is to focus on grade level standards and where our students need to be at the end of the year. And in order to do that, we know that we need to prioritize what students need to learn in order to reach this goal. Okay, so we need to focus on the depth of our standards and skills as opposed to the breadth. And then in order to do that, we need to identify the most effective assessments, resources, and strategies that will ensure that our students are reaching the next level of learning. Okay, again, focusing on grade level mastery. Next slide. So high quality instruction is nothing that is new to MMSD, but what we wanted to be sure we were doing going into the fall was having a really laser-like focus, again, on these focus standards and being sure that we were using data in a really effective way as an equity strategy in order to ensure that we are building up towards grade level mastery. So our work this summer has been rooted in this student-centered goal that is rooted in Black excellence and ensures that all students at MMSD are receiving high-quality grade level accelerated instruction. And we wanted to be sure that our approach was rooted in SEL was anti-racist, culturally and linguistically responsive, and was able to work to interrupt this pattern of outcomes that we're seeing for our Black students. So we knew we had to do something different. And so we're really rooting ourselves in social emotional learning as we look at this instructional focus and plan coming through the fall. We knew social emotional learning could not be an add-on, but it had to be the lens through which we instruct and the lens through which we teach. We also knew that we had to ensure that all of our lessons were standards aligned and were grade level standards aligned, and that our approach was both culturally and linguistically responsive. And we had 3 major strategies to ensure that we are reaching this student-centered goal. And those 3 are our instructional expectations, ensuring that they are rigorous and consistent. Number 2, the effective use of assessment and data as an equity strategy. And then 3, ensuring effective and timely communication and engagement. Next slide. So Lisa spoke to this a little bit about the group of 150 MMSD community members and teachers and principals and students and central office staff that we had working on this re-entry subcommittee work. We knew that going into this next school year, again, that we needed to create resources, processes, and experiences for our teachers and for our staff in order for them to be able to design this high quality instruction rooted in SEL, anti-racist practices, and was culturally and linguistically responsive. So for about the past 6 weeks, we have had this group of 150 members come together multiple times a week, both at an elementary, middle, and high school level, to really create 3 different deliverables. So while central office and the curriculum and instruction department is really focusing on the what, on what is being taught, this subcommittee focused on the how. Okay, and so the deliverables that they've been working on there's 3 of them. So number 1, they worked on processes for staff to really interrogate our current curriculum, instruction, and resources to ensure that what we are doing and how we are doing it is done through an anti-racist and an SEL lens. Number 2, we really have them work to determine, all right, well, if this is our end goal, if this is what we want to be true out of the learning experience for our students at MMSD, then what is it? What are the supports that our teachers, our staff, our principals are going to need entering into the school year? And then what are those consistent supports and learning experiences that we will need to continue to provide to them? And then lastly, what are the resources that we're going to need in order to meet our end goal of our identified, prioritized grade level standards? So that has been the work that we have a group of 150 incredibly committed people working on. Next slide.
Before we go and Kaylee goes into the assessment work, I just want to acknowledge Cindy Green in the work of this committee. You know, I can remember before Kaylee was hired and I said, Cindy, I need you to start this instructional work. I need you to lead this instructional work. I know that you are not formally the head of C&I anymore, but I said, I need you to do this. You have the best chops for it. And she did. And she pulled the group together and we worked on the structure, and Kaylee came and sat down and thought with Cindy and did problem solving and collaborating around it. So just want to acknowledge Kaylee and Cindy in their partnership in this. And boy, Cindy, when I came to you all those months ago, you said yes and stepped up to the plate, and just really want to thank you and your passion for this and your relentless focus on really high quality instruction continuing for students. So just wanted to add that piece, Kaylee. Sorry to interrupt.
No, don't apologize at all, Lisa. And let me just go ahead and co-sign that because Cindy has just done a fantastic job rooting us all in this work. And it has been a wonderful passing of the baton experience to do this alongside her. So Cindy, you are much appreciated. Okay, next slide. Let's talk about assessments. Okay, so this slide here gives us a little bit of context for this year's assessment strategy. So MMSD has been working on a comprehensive assessment plan that started in 1819. And we were working both with schools and central office leaders and staff in order to come up with this plan. So during that time, the group evaluated the current assessments and provided recommendations on the findings. And what they found was that we had a ton of evaluative assessments. And what we found from that was that we needed to incorporate assessments that were closer to instruction, right? Because that's where we get the biggest change and the greatest bang for our buck. So then we concluded that we needed to create this assessment vision, which grounded us in the notion of using assessments and high quality assessment data as an equity strategy. And so what you're looking at is the results of that plan. So this past year in 1920, we really worked on implementing our FastBridge for progress monitoring. We field tested FastBridge measures of early learning. We used PALS as our literacy screener, both for English and Spanish, and engaged stakeholders in studying a replacement for MAP, and then investigated content area interim instructional assessments. Within our instructional recovery and acceleration plan, we know we need to do things really differently, and we call out assessment as a key pillar because we know that if we and when we collect and actually use meaningful data, that we can uplift our equitable practices and achieve the results we want to see for our students. So we are now on year 2 out of our 5-year plan, and we are continuing with the recommendations that we received from the Council of Great City Schools, TNTP, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and the Achievement Network. What we really want to do is strike a balance between the need for assessments and the instructional time that it takes to give. We want to engage in critical screening because we know that there is unfinished learning that happened in the spring. And so we need to identify where that unfinished learning occurred so that we can effectively plan and scaffold upwards as we go into the fall in order to ensure mastery of our grade level standards. Next slide, please. And so what this slide is giving is a general illustration of the 2021 assessment strategy. So what you'll see in the green and the gold are our screener and interim assessments. Our screener assessments are the assessments that identify the unfinished learning. Okay, those are our adaptive assessments. And the green are the assessments that are our grade level assessments. Okay, so we are ensuring that multiple times throughout the school year, our students are experiencing grade level tasks, and our teachers and our parents and our families are able to then respond to that. What we want to be sure we're doing is that we are giving both our teachers and our students the opportunity to engage in grade level material before we get to the end of the year. We don't want any surprises. We want to be able to respond to it. And so the green and the gold are assessments that are both required and supported from the district. Again, we also know that the money is really at the short cycle formative assessments, right? Those are the ones that happen weekly, daily, within a lesson. And so we obviously still know the importance for short cycle formative assessments. So we will be working with school leaders in order to support their teachers to ensure that those are happening in an effective and timely manner as well. Next slide. Miss Cindy Green.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Hopefully you can see me. I'm going to tag team this with Kaylee as we talk a little bit about grading, both kind of what we learned from the spring and where we are headed for the fall. Just as a reminder, as you all know, in the spring, we made some significant shifts to grading due to the world that we were in. And we wanted to make sure that students were not harmed in the process that we had to abruptly go into of virtual learning. We went with a pass, no pass at the high school level, and we made some other changes at elementary and at middle school level. Going into the fall and our proactive approach, we are going to resort back to the majority of our grading as usual. And that looks at the elementary level and our standards-based reporting system that we have in place. I think the one shift that we're really trying to hone in on and make around grading is the idea of the input side of grading, which we want to mostly focus on feedback to students. We know feedback at all levels of the system is critically important. And we know in order for continuous improvement with our students and for mastery of standards, our students need ongoing, frequent cycles of feedback in order to continuously work towards mastery. So one of the approaches that we're taking is that families and students are going to receive weekly feedback on what's happening during their virtual learning experiences. In addition to that, teachers will use their body of evidence as they have in the past to make decisions about where students are towards meeting those standards and how they're progressing towards the standards throughout the year. And then they'll do the output side of it in terms of our traditional report card that we have at elementary. At secondary, we also want to make sure that we're focused on the idea of feedback. And so we want teachers to be providing a few progress updates on a weekly basis to students so that students are receiving feedback on how they're doing towards their assignments, how they're doing in the units of instruction that they have, and also so that families are able to see what that progress is. As you know, either Google Classroom and Infinite Campus will be our main means of feedback to students and families. And so we want to make sure that that is continuously updated so everyone knows how they are doing. We'll really focus on the idea of formative and summative assessments and how those feedback cycles and what the assignments that students are getting feedback on look like. And just to foreshadow, in addition to that, we are continuing to make changes at the secondary level to grading as we want to get to a more equitable grading system and move away from an antiquated system that we've had in place. So we'll be providing an update to the board later this week through our weekly updates with more information about that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Affelt, oversee the Department of Student and Staff Support, and Lisa flagged for you that that we'd be shifting attendance as we head into the fall as well. I think many of you know that in spring of 2020, we used attendance primarily as a tool to make sure that we were in contact with our students and families, doing everything we could to make sure that they were connected to resources and assisting them with accessing whatever it is that they needed. And as we shift into the fall, we're going to be using it more so as a strategy for engaging and learning and supporting our families and their students through instruction. We also recognize that we need to maintain flexibility in that despite our best efforts, everyone will experience learning this fall in a slightly different way. We will, however, be shifting to take attendance daily, which is a shift from our weekly approach during the spring. That's also in alignment with our board policy. We will likely be anchoring our attendance strategy with a daily series of daily check-ins that come through those learning platforms that Kaylee and Cindy just referred to with Ready Rosie, Seesaw, and Google Classroom, but also as we shift towards more synchronous instruction where teachers and their students will be together in sync, asking teachers to take attendance during those opportunities. And then also similar to the spring, two-way communication and recognizing that that there are many different modes and ways that students can show us that they're engaged. Next slide, please. Kaylee also mentioned that, I think she said that it's very clear to all of us that social emotional learning cannot be an add-on. And recognizing the state of our world and what our students and families and our staff have been through, we have a critical focus on social emotional learning throughout all of our planning for the fall. Traditional social emotional learning has to do with setting and achieving positive goals, establishing and maintaining really strong relationships, and helping students understand how to both feel and show empathy. but increasingly looking at this as transformational social emotional learning, where we also bring in historical and our social political context, especially given our current circumstances. Making sure that we're doing everything we can to help our students focus on their own identities and their own belief in themselves. In addition, supporting our adults with similar understanding and recognizing what it is that we as staff and what our teachers need as they carry themselves into the learning environments. And so it will take a couple different forms. And first of all, I think we'll see more explicit teaching of social emotional learning in our learning environments. More of a focus than ever at the start of the school year in creating safe and equitable learning environments, but also, as again, as Kaylee mentioned, embedding social emotional learning within all of our content areas and all of our planning. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has obviously resulted in high levels of stress for many of us. And when we combine this stress in some cases with existing mental health concerns or other sources of distress, including race trauma, becomes critical to provide a range of intentional supports. And we're again committed to delivering a very robust and proactive set of school-based mental health supports that are culturally responsive and trauma-informed. This approach builds on the safe and welcoming school environment, strong relationships, staff wellness, and student and family voice that are critical to the social emotional learning that I just mentioned. We're also recognizing that it's essential for us to tap into our students' resilience and natural supports. Those are powerful strategies to support our students' well-being and recognizing the strengths that they've carried through all that they've experienced, and making sure that we're doing whatever we can to leverage support to help our student population address any existing mental health concerns. Next slide, please. Also cover some of the work of other departments and some of my colleagues. So John Harper is obviously leading some pretty significant work in special education. And I think most of you are aware that there is more targeted access to educational environments in some cases as we individualize instruction, revisit IEPs, revisit instructional goals, and in some cases provide more targeted support based on whatever individual students need. That also includes redesigning our staffing plans or schedules and being really creative in trying to find the best way to help our students meet their goals. With Sharon Alexander and our advanced learning group, finding ways to group learners to maximize effectiveness of our programming through virtual learning, and then strengthening support and differentiation for students through, again, creative staffing and creative scheduling. Sylvia Romero Johnson is doing a lot to prepare for service to our English language learners. In particular, looking to cluster based on language proficiency, home language background, or other needs, making sure that they're supporting each individual's individualized learning plan. Also strengthening teacher co-planning, making sure that our ESL and BRT staff are closely connected with classroom teachers, making sure that they're integrating supports in daily instruction, and then also working with a focus on communication with resource specialists, in particular to support family communication. Looking for grouping as well, that classroom composition is balanced so that the number of English speaking students and students who speak communication with our families, and recognizing that without clear communication in the home language, it's difficult for us to engage families.
Jay, you're cutting off a little bit. Jay, I'm
Okay.
sorry, you're cutting off a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll wrap that slide and I'll move to the next.
The only thing I would add to that, I see Jay's frozen up a little bit there. The only thing I would add is something that we learned around service delivery in the spring and in the summer was that families actually needed more support. If they had students who had an IEP or were advanced learners or English language learners. So the OMGE team, as well as Michelle's team, are going to be working hard to ensure that there are more explicit supports for families, such as podcasts to help families navigate multiple learners that might be attending school. And OMGE has been working really hard to make sure that directions and learning targets are specified in 2 languages if need be, So paying attention to some of sort of the scaffolding that has to happen that might be very specific to some of these areas is something that we're working on as a result of the learning. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't know if I'm back or not, but if you can hear me, I'll keep presenting. Next slide. I also want to recognize all of Caroline Racine-Gillis's work around our critical transitions. I think many of you have maybe even accessed our mmsd.org/transition website. Significant guidance being provided to schools as they navigate the virtual environment, you know, and remember the transition started last spring and they carry throughout the summer. And we know that a lot of our students who are jumping across those gaps and into a new school are likely to carry some additional anxiety. And Caroline has provided a lot of support in looking at how we can strategize these transitions, whether it's individual phone calls home, new letters, and other tutorials to help introduce students and families to new schools. Looking at some additional days, working with John's department for our cross-categorical staff to transition around what we've learned about individual students in one level and transitioning that to the next. And then also revamping some of our support for transitioning some of our youngest learners into those environments. And I will hand it off now to Nichelle to talk more about our support for families.
All right, thank you. Next slide.
Hi, Nichelle.
Hey, everybody. So one of the exciting things that we are working on is we are bringing a cross-collaborative team together. It includes the communications department, our Office of Multilingual and Global Education, the instructional technology team, and of course our family, youth, and community engagement team. And we had a great meeting even today to talk about what are the things that we've heard from families from the surveys that Andrew covered earlier, that we've heard through summer school experiences, and that we've heard from a lot of our staff and families directly about what is needed. So on this slide, you see just some examples of things that we've been starting to brainstorm. And you know, some of the highlights that you heard even today around new expectations around attendance, new guidelines around virtual platforms for 4K, K-5, and then 6 through 12. All of those things are things that we know families are going to need to understand and know about. And so we are thinking about what's the menu of opportunities that we can provide that will help bring our families along and feel like they can access the information, but also support their own children as learners. And so we are going to get a little bit more detailed in the next week with the variety of things that we will pull together. But as Lisa already said, we're looking at podcasts, we're looking at Facebook Live sessions, we're thinking about training, you know, kind of like classes for parents that they can sign up for or watch as pre-recorded. And we definitely want to make sure all of these opportunities are multilingual and inviting. And I will just say the other thing that we talked about today is we know that schools and our staff that work in schools are reaching out to families. And there's going to be a lot more professional learning for our staff on using the platforms and organizing them in a way that will help students really engage in a much better way. And we don't want to overwhelm families when we know that schools and our staff are going to be reaching out to them. So we want our work at the district level to be very complementary and proactive. And so we will have more of a defined menu of opportunities in the next week or so, but we are definitely working on it. And we're trying to bring as many departments to the table so that we have a really good, culturally responsive approach to those supports. And that does it for me. And I'm not sure who's next, Lisa.
I think that's me, Nichelle.
Next slide is Jorge, where he's going to talk to us about how we are really developing a common learning agenda for staff, how we've taken feedback from MTI and our stakeholders to design the Welcome Back Days, and how we're building in sort of those routines and expectations along with the necessary flexibility that schools need for their instructional design. So Jorge, I'll let you run with it.
All right.
Hi,
Thank you,
Jorge.
Lisa. Buenas noches, everyone. It's nighttime, right? Yeah. So again, my name is Jorge Covarrubias, and I am the Executive Director of Professional Learning and Leadership Development. And yes, Lisa has already really done it. She just did a great job of explaining, really thinking through professional learning and our why. My colleagues have also shared, you know, in regards to just some of the things that have come up in regards to our why. So thinking about how this ties to this opportunity that we have, not just to come back and do the same things that we've always done, but really to reimagine and rethink how we can provide a learning experience for our children and our communities. You know, one thing that I want to call out here is that it definitely is about uplifting voices, as we heard from families, students, and others, that we cannot go back to what we've done in the past. And we certainly need to be doing something different than what we did in March, when we were in that moment of just scrambling and making sure we could get something off the ground. So as you see here, again, thinking about our why, we're ensuring those relationships, thinking about how it really uplifts our strategic framework, and really prioritizing our academic standards as well as our social emotional learning standards. I'm sorry. Oh,
I think there's somebody with unmuted. If
Oh,
Melissa
okay.
and Barb can mute everybody else, but Jorge will be great. Thank you. Sorry about that, Jorge.
No, that's okay. So Melissa, can you head to the next slide, please? So I think this quote really lifts it up from our why. You know, it's essential learning. This essential learning will prepare us for reentry with students in the fall, ensuring all staff are prepared to execute on MMSD's anti-racist stance rooted in transformational social emotional learning practices. You know, again, it's essential that we provide our staff with the necessary time it's going to take to actually dig in and create this foundation. So what you're going to see in the next couple slides is really a high overview of the 8 days of professional learning that we're going to outline. Melissa, can you hit the next slide, please? So as you see, on these days, we have a total of 8 days. We worked really hard to work with MTI and come up with this solution around being able to have 8 days for professional learning, knowing that this is really an opportunity for us to ground staff, all staff, in what it means to teach and lead in a virtual world, as well as when we're talking about what are best practices in communicating and connecting with families. What does that actually look like, lifting these platforms up and using them for their full potential? Because we know that wasn't happening, and because it was new. It was new, quite frankly, for a lot of people. So you can see here, really creating this flow and this time throughout this first week to get ourselves grounded. Nichelle already talked a little bit about really the CARES framework and ensuring that our staff have this foundation, as they're going to be taking some time throughout week 1 and week 2 to connect with families, right? And it's not just that phone call. There's going to be a variety of ways to actually engage with families. And again, really creating a foundation for all of our staff as we lead with these new platforms, and as we lead with this new way of really engaging students in learning and families in learning. So you can kind of take a look at this, but again, family connections being called out, our standards and accelerated learning being called out, a welcoming message from Dr. Jenkins, our new superintendent, is going to be super critical as we kick off day 1. And as you see moving into the next week, so Melissa, can you go to the next slide? As you see again here, what's being called out, the connections to cells, the connections to the assessment, but also allowing teachers to apply this work, to think through the work, to really take time to plan, and that family connection time all throughout. Some of the things that I know there was a question earlier in regards to how to differentiate for staff. This is new. This is going to be new learning for all. And for us to really create a foundation where we can move from. So that's important that we're all engaged at this level for these 2 weeks of welcome back. Moving forward, what's going to be great is that we're going to be where we can build in that differentiation is going to be during our Wednesday time. So our Wednesday PD. And we can talk further about that at a later time. But I wanted to just take this time to really highlight the welcome back and how we're going to be engaging staff in schools and community and all that you just heard from all of my colleagues. Thank you.
Next slide, please, Melissa. So we're going to pause here, I think, Ananda, and see if there are any questions or any wonderings from the board before we move on to MSCR and that update from Kelly and her team.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I know it was quite a lot. We wanted to make sure to provide folks with the things that came up salient in every meeting for the last, I think 3 or 4 months. And I think from this point on, we'll just be moving into updates, but we want to take this meeting to sort of really hone in and to kind of get folks a better sense of the extent in which how this work has shaped and the depth of the work as well. So thank you, Lisa, for that. And thank you for everyone in the team that made all of this possible. And I really appreciate the way that you made this presentation to just walk us through like the various buckets of this really critical work. So I'm gonna go Ali, Gloria, Savian, and Chris.
Thank you so much, Ananda. One of the bits of feedback I've heard from young people on a consistent basis is that there isn't a ton of opportunity to, I guess, have, that development around kind of their social skills or ability to be in community with one another, which is intensively meaningful and developmentally appropriate throughout the ages that we work with our young folks. The other thing I'm curious about is how we are emphasizing opportunities within the arts, and not so much maybe our K through 8th grade art opportunities, but more so those very specific areas within high school where young people finally get the chance to take pottery every day or metal work every day for a semester, and they get to work with the equipment and the materials. How are we curbing those interests and our young people's ability to explore those interests?
Cindy, you want to take the fine arts piece and the secondary piece?
Sure, I was going to start, and Ali addressed your first part around building community. So one thing that we didn't necessarily highlight in this presentation, but that we are committed to and focused on across all of our schools is the concept of an advisor and or advisory structure at the secondary level. So an advisor at the elementary level may be the classroom teacher and may create small spaces for students to build community, check in with them, be responsive to what the students need, authentic space to kind of check in not only on their social emotional well-being, but also their academic well-being. At middle school, it is a universal expectation that all of our schools will have advisory. So a space, though in the virtual world, probably not as ideal for community building, but the space that we have where students will have a group of peers to build community, to focus on social emotional learning, to think about the students' needs and for the adult to be responsive and have an authentic space. And then similarly at high school, an adult that will wrap around a small group of students. So we've been really thinking about the need for community building We've also been building out kind of what we would call like our best practices in the Zoom setting. How do you create an engaging structure? How do you build community? Through that, you'll see that also in our social emotional curriculum, as well as thinking about some of the work of developmental designs. So that's kind of a broad answer to that, but that has been a piece that we're intentionally focused on for the fall. I can start on the high school courses, and I can ask Kaylee to jump in as well. We are offering all of our courses going into the fall that students chose and were scheduled for in the spring. Our teachers and our central office staff have been working, I would say, tirelessly in thinking about how to ensure that those spaces are authentic, to ensure how those experiences for students will still be of high quality while they may not have the physical materials in front of them. And so they've been really creative in thinking about the curriculum and then thinking about what that means as kids, hopefully at some point soon, will start to phase into a hybrid model and back to a face-to-face. We had toggled with, should we potentially consider canceling some of our courses, and with the work of our central office teams and our teachers, they really felt that they could pull some resources together and create authentic spaces and authentic curriculum to continue the trajectory of those courses that we know for many students lead to industry certification, lead to lots of opportunities post high school. So that's just another kind of high level overview of where we are around courses. Hopefully that answered your questions a little bit.
Yeah, for the most part, getting into the earlier ages when we're talking about kind of the social emotional support, I very much appreciate hearing kind of the advisory model. I think that's a helpful piece to flush out. But looking at more of our play-based learning for those really little kiddos, is there an opportunity on Zoom for play or via remote learning? Are there ways that we're incorporating kind of developmentally appropriate expressions of play that are still academic, but also allow for those real kind of developmentally appropriate social emotional benefits?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, particularly as it relates to our younger grades. So Colleen, Carletra, and Chelsea have been doing a really great job of creating what this virtual learning 2.0 experience looks like, particularly for our youngest community members. And what the approach that they're really taking right now is ensuring that we are first working with families to outline what play-based learning looks like at the home. And we are working with them to identify what some of these lessons may be, to provide them with the resources that they need at home in order to continue to have that. Obviously the struggle, right, is like we can't have children in the same place, but what we can do is work particularly and directly with our families in order to ensure that the lessons that would be happening face-to-face, they're able to recreate within the home.
Thank you so much for answering my question, and welcome to the team, Kaylee. It's great to meet you.
Thanks, nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Kaylee, and thank you, Ali, for that question. I, as a mother of a high schooler who has access to a car, I have not thought about like how are young people in particularly engaging into just interactions outside of what the formative instruction that also enhances their learning. So thank you so much for that question. I feel like I wanted to think more about how young people are building community in the world of virtual, and also how our staff are being supported and supporting each other when everything is about just structured meetings versus just informal interactions or informal check-ins. So appreciate the humanity aspect of the question. I think it was Gloria, Savion, and Chris. I can't remember, but that's how it's showing up now for me.
Thank you, Ananda. And thanks for bringing this topic onto the instruction work group. I think it was great timing, needed. I'm looking forward to the continued conversations, discussions, and updates. And during the instruction work group, the community definitely was, earning for this, based on what we were all hearing. So thank you for bringing this to us. My question is, Lisa, I know you guys have done an amazing job at setting this virtual learning, thinking about our entire student body, and just wondering if there's anything specific around our opportunity youth students, if there has been an opportunity to actually really think about how we engage those students who were already struggling before virtual, who need that extra. And I don't know what it looks like, but anything, any discussions around that, that will take sort of like thinking outside the box of how we engage them and keep them. As you know, many of our students are struggling with so many things, and our parents as well. And to even think about like play things, to do, that's the last thing on their agenda, right? It is, they're trying to get to work, working multiple jobs, just struggling. I just don't know how we capture these students so we don't continue to lose them. And wondering what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I think Cindy, you probably have some thoughts for us, and then I can add a little bit too when you're done.
Sure. Hey, Gloria, I can start. I don't know if Mike is on the call too, but I'll talk about a few different things. And I would say we just don't have all of the answers. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we have all of the answers right now for anything, but I'll tell you a few things that we're thinking about. One, we are working very closely with our community partners that support some of our youth and our alternative programs, and thinking about how they are going to continue to program and run their programs in the fall, because we know for many of our students, they're reliant on those. So we're in the process of having those conversations. We are also continuing to plan for our micro school, both for the West High School, and also thinking about our transition academy through Goodman and what those environments will look like, what the supports will look like in the online setting, how our team is wrapping around those students as well to ensure that they have everything they need. Both of those settings have small numbers of students, so we're feeling good about both the engagement opportunities through virtual learning as well as some of the additional supports. And then I would say at our 6 high schools, each high school has been thinking deeply about this and using what they learned in the spring and trying to expand on that. And one example is at La Follette High School in the spring, they had what they called an advisor or a mentor assigned to every single student. So every adult in the school had a small caseload of students that they were responsible for. And in a proactive way, first and foremost, making sure they had a charger, making sure they had food, making sure they had what they needed just to check in for the day and to check into the learning. And then that adult became the trusted adult that the students were able to connect with throughout that entire time. And the adults were kind of doing the running around, making sure that they had what they need. Similarly, at East High School, they did that, but those adults also provided tutoring supports for students if they needed extra supports for their content areas. And so going into the fall, each one of our 6 high schools is thinking deeply about who are the adults that will be assigned to students, what are their kind of proactive measures that they need to take on, and then how can we also ensure students are able to receive the learning opportunities if they cannot engage in the synchronous time based on the need to go to a job, based on the need to take care of their younger siblings or any circumstance, and how do we ensure we don't penalize students and get them the access to the curriculum that advisor or that mentor will support in that. So those are a few things that we're working on. And as I said, we are continuously thinking through other things that we can put in place, and also really heavily leveraging our partners to hear from them in terms of how they're thinking about it as well, so we can work together to support our students.
Great, thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Gloria. Savian?
Yeah, I'm curious on the I take it, all the appointments have been virtual. Have there been increased caseloads? Have there been more if we are continuing some of the Black Excellence service projects or project-based learning?
Savian, you're breaking up a little bit.
Where did I start breaking up at? I can repeat.
It's been on and off. So just, can you summarize the question so we make sure that folks understand what?
Yeah, so I'm curious, have we seen an increase in demand for mental health supports and students requesting an appointment with a therapist at a school? And then are we continuing some of the project-based learning and service-based learning with the Black Excellence projects that we saw last spring?
Thank you.
Savion, great questions. I'll jump in real quick. Of course, we've got summer school programming, and we did see some requests for mental health support through some of that programming. Anecdotally, I would say that we've not seen an uptick. We also continue to use Securely to monitor any sort of alarming searches or content that any of our students are using with their devices through their accounts. And we've also not seen a significant uptick in Securely alerts, which is another sort of informal request for support. But I see that Nichelle is back on to address some of your other questions.
Yes. Hey, Savion, thanks for that question. So as we've been all hands on deck in terms of planning for the reopening and really thinking about what the experiences are going to be for our students and families, particularly, in a virtual start, I certainly would love and want to see Black Excellence projects helping to fill in some of those other experiences that we know a lot of our students took advantage of in April and May and June. And I was receiving text messages, hopefully y'all were seeing Facebook posts of people who really took advantage of the programming, just absolutely loving it because it added another dimension to school. And I have not quite mapped out what our timeline will be to open up those projects again. But in full transparency, I think one of the things that I'd like to talk with Dr. Jenkins about is what we learned from a lot of the innovative projects that just ended. And then how do we create an invitation that feels more open and transparent to other community organizations in our community who may want an opportunity to really work with our students. So I'm working on a timeline for that. And then definitely want to run that by Dr. Jenkins as we get ready to reopen the year.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everybody for all the work that is happening on this. I mean, just to watch the procession of people who are involved in this really high level figuring out of the complexity of this. So Lisa, Kaylee, Cindy, Jay, Nichelle, Jorge, I hope I didn't forget anybody, but thank you for the work that's happening around this. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to try to streamline them here. My first question is around the synchronous learning and, saying that's going to happen on Zoom and through various platforms. How do we know yet how much of that families can expect, and if there's going to be a structure by school level, or when we'll have that information on what to expect around that? And then my other questions are sort of go back to the slides on the high quality instruction and the re-entry subcommittee work. And I really appreciate that student-centered goal of high quality grade level accelerated instruction, and just curious about the strategies that are listed there for achieving the goal. If there's more information on, we are going to have high instructional expectations, sort of how are we going to measure those to make sure it's rigorous and consistent across schools, across grade levels, that sort of thing. The communication and engagement, we know we have to do that really well with families. How are we going to measure that that's happening at different schools, at different school levels? And then the work of the reentry subcommittee. I love that this is focused on the deliverables of how this is all going to happen. And we know that the how is so important. And so I'm curious if the work of this subcommittee is going to continue, and if we can get some more information on, you know, they're determining the, I guess it says, the essential professional learning processes and structures that are needed to support staff, and they're identifying the resources that are needed to meet our end goals of the student-centered, like, high quality instruction. So are we going to get more information from them on how those deliverables work and what support you guys might need to make that happen?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start by saying, like, part of the starting of this meeting is to make sure that we are in continuation of hearing that. So we heard a lot from what's happening in the summer. The expectation from Andrew's team and from Lisa's team is that we'll continue to monitor that. It's going to look different as we're moving forward, but the goal is that every month we'll revisit different buckets and different updates. And of course, we'll have a more expensive survey, access to the full survey as well. Lisa, what else would you add to respond to Chris's question?
Yeah, I would say that all of this is specified. We gave the board a high level summary of what's happening with the reentry in the fall, and we'll be providing the board with a detailed virtual learning, or actually the instructional continuity plan later in the week, where the details are listed. I think that, yeah, so we're definitely doing that. Just want folks to know that that plan is still fluid and evolving based on what we're learning from public health, based on what we're learning about best practices in virtual learning. And then I will say, before I pass it off, probably to TJ to talk a little bit about synchronous instruction, is that we really wrote this plan based on the feedback and the asks that families, children, and staff had. Staff asked us for more guidance around virtual instruction. Families asked to actually know more specifics about what they can expect and what their child can expect. So we actually did a fair amount of writing guidance, including for central office staff, so that people were real clear what their roles and responsibilities were, knowing that right, we wanted to go into the fall doing things differently and improving the work that we did around virtual learning. So TJ, I'll hand it off to you to give a bit of a summary to that, knowing that the full document will be shared later this week.
So I think the most important thing that Lisa just uplifted was, and going back to even part of what Kaylee talked about, it's just the way we designed the plan to really look at the expectations of a lot of key individuals and roles. And that even is the teacher role. So one of the things that we tried to do this year was really look at what is it that we wanted that student experience to be. And so in order to do that, to answer the question around, is there going to be recommendations around synchronous and asynchronous learning? Yes. We did a better job, we believe, this time with defining that to say each student will receive this, and that. And so it's really going to be drawn out in the plan to ensure that we are creating a common experience for our families, to ensure like that acceleration of learning is really happening. And so in order to do that, we've done a really good job of defining what asynchronous learning is and what synchronous learning is at the same time.
Great, thank you.
And I'm wondering too, Jane, if you can work with Dr. Jenkins and TJ to kind of give us some updates on the weekly as well. If there's like specific things that we're learning or key things that we're learning as we're moving. Yeah, thank you so much, TJ, and Jane. Yeah, thank you. Lisa, are we ready to move to the next part?
I think as long as there are no more questions around the instructional side, that we are definitely ready to move into the MSCR side. Thank you for asking, Ananda.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Kelly. And Melissa, whenever you're ready. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. There you go. We're
Hi,
on.
everybody. I'm going to ask Janet to show her. There she is. All right. So Janet and I are going to give you an update, not only on the very successful program we had this summer, but how that leads into our planning for this coming fall to support our students in a child care setting while doing virtual learning. Janet and her team have done an absolutely incredible job of putting students at the center. There is no challenge too big for our MSCR team to solve. And I just want to give a great big shout out to Janet and her team who have been working tirelessly throughout the summer and currently to prepare for the fall. So I'm going to hand this over to Janet. Melissa, go ahead and take the next slide to give you an update on how summer went and where we're headed for the fall as it relates to MSCR Cares Camp.
Thanks, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to give a real brief summary of what we did this summer and some of the things that we've learned through our summer programming that are going to help direct some changes as we move into fall. So MSCR held CARES Camp in 8 of our elementary schools this summer, serving nearly 300 students. We also worked with some of our kind of regular providers that do after-school programming in our schools, including Red Caboose, Wisconsin Youth Company, and the Y, to provide 6 additional summer programs in our school buildings for another 200 or so students. What we also did this summer was learned a lot and managed COVID-19, I think successfully with the help of Sally's team with health services. And by managing it, what I mean is that we really learned how to cohort students and prevent commingling. We really learned how to manage situations when students and or staff had symptoms and how to deal with situations, unfortunately, that we did experience with a few staff and 1 student that tested positive. So we did learn a lot from that. Moving forward, we'll continue to learn and share the work that we're doing with health services. We feel like we had a really solid plan this summer with MSCR Cares, and we're building on that based on some of the lessons that we've learned. And real briefly, without going into much detail about those lessons at this time, because we're still kind of gathering them, we learned that we do need to simplify our registration process a bit and make sure that our communication with families is really clear, and doing so hopefully by getting some asking for and receiving some additional support from schools. I don't have a copy of that slide, so I wonder if we can bounce back, Melissa, to the previous slide. A couple of other lessons that we've learned in terms of communicating with families. Definitely email alone is not going to be enough. We're looking at texting options so that we're communicating with families. Definitely looking at adding some additional staff to support students with their virtual learning, and also some additional staff to support students that need some that may have a disability and need some additional support in order to be successful in the program. Some questions still to be answered around scheduling. For sure, having a later start to when students need to be involved with virtual learning is going to be very helpful, so that we can get students fed breakfast and get them acclimated to being in the building before they have to get into their virtual learning classes. A lot of questions about space have been answered, and working closely with Chad's team. Clearly, we're going to need more space as we're planning to serve more students. Questions about furniture, things that we didn't think about early on, making sure that we had age-appropriate furniture for all of our programs. A lot of talk about kind of staff training and parent training around supporting students with virtual learning. And we would sort of put our MSCR Cares Camp staff in that same category as parents. We know we need to learn a little bit more about how to support students that are going to be in our childcare programs so that we can support their virtual learning. Definitely looking at more training around health and safety, working with food services and transportation, making sure that those services are available to our families. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at in terms of a program structure in the fall, similar but larger scale than we had this summer. We're going to be expanding MSCR Cares to 16 locations, including 15 elementary schools and the Allied Learning Center. Our hope is to serve as many as 1,000 students in those 16 MSCR programs. And what that would look like is hopefully the majority of the students will attend childcare in their home schools, but we know that always won't be possible. But in the school buildings, we hope to serve up to 60 students in each of the schools. Those students will be in 4 cohorts with 10 to 15 students in a cohort. We're hoping to follow the regular school schedule for the start of the day with some extended day options for those families that would traditionally have their children in after school programming. So we need to run later than the traditional school day. And of course, we'll continue to evaluate so that each quarter moving forward, we can improve on what we're doing. And we are prepared to move to a hybrid model once that happens with school, doing both after school programming and full day childcare in non-school locations for students on the days they're participating in virtual learning. Some really important factors to keep in mind for us right now. When we went into the summer, we were focused just on MSCR, getting programs started. We had a very short period of time to do that. We're hoping to begin this week our registration process so that we have more times to connect with families, to get input from principals and other school staff so that we're reaching the families that need this childcare program the most. We have some issues to work around licensing of our sites for childcare, as we'll be in many more sites than we typically are. And we're also working very hard to reach the kids that need this service the most, working with our highest need students based on, families' abilities to pay for childcare, and that includes our TEP families. We're going to be meeting with principals on Friday, and we have a system for getting referrals from principals and other school staff. And then some other priorities may include staff that are working in the program who need childcare in order to work, just like other essential workers, and possibly when we go to a more in-person model that we recognize that teachers may have a need for childcare. Next slide, please. So this work hasn't been exclusively done by MSCR. We've relied on a number of departments in the district, and I probably missed some in this slide, but probably most critically, Sally's team in health services were involved in our programs on a daily basis. Of course, we're following all of the Public Health Madison and Dane County guidelines, but also following the protocol from our MMSD Health and Safety. Basically, whatever Sally tells us to do, we do it so that we're keeping staff and kids safe. Sally's team helped us prepare an MSCR Cares Health and Safety Manual, and we are building on that and improving on that for fall programming. What was critical for us this summer was that we had a nursing assistant on site at all of our programs to help with the daily screenings, whether it's taking temperatures when kids show up, following up with families who may not have done their kind of family screening that they're supposed to do online before kids come, providing daily guidance on COVID-19 with close contacts, following up with who we needed to talk to. They communicate with families, they communicated with public health, and they communicated with our staff on that. We're working really closely this fall because we have a huge ask of our Human Resources Department to reassign at least 150 MMSD staff that may be underutilized in the virtual school model in order for us to be able to fund in order for us to be able to utilize staff in our CARES program so that we're not looking to hire the entire 250 or so staff that we need. Working closely with Chad's team, and they've been wonderful this summer, providing PPE and custodial services and following up when we had to close down a classroom or two because of a case of COVID-19 or close contacts. Working closely with Mick on transportation. Food services, of course, provided meals this summer, and they'll do so again throughout the school year as needed. I mentioned earlier that we really need some additional training for our staff on supporting virtual learning. TJ's been great with making the library media technology specialist available to support not only MSCR programs, but other programs that I'll talk about that'll be in the schools. And I think I also failed to mention the support that we're getting from Jay's team and making sure that our staff and students have access to folks from, to deal with some of the social and emotional supports that are needed. We look to take greater advantage of that in the fall. Next slide, please. So staffing is kind of a key area for us as well as for community providers that are going to be doing programming in our building as and elsewhere. In order to run these 16 programs successfully, we need about 224 staff at the MSCR sites. And MSCR seasonal staff have some limitations on the number of hours that they can work. Many of our staff are students or have other jobs, perhaps with the district, that aren't going to be available to work full-time in MSCR CARES. So we're going to be relying on other MMSD staff to support these programs. We know for sure that we will have our full-time MSCR after-school site directors will be overseeing programs at each of the 15 elementary schools that we have after-school programming. Other positions in the program will need to be reassigned staff and or other seasonal staff that MSCR will hire. So our recommendations, as I mentioned before, we'll need to reassign at least 150 staff. And Deirdre and her team are working with principals and department heads to ensure that they're doing an analysis of what staff are needed for virtual learning and what staff may be able to be reassigned to MSCR CARES. Some of those positions, but certainly not only EAs or SEAs or BEAs, but any staff that are available and willing to work directly with students are going to be welcomed with open arms, of course. We do have a number of MMSD students that currently work at MSCR programs, and we're looking to prioritize those individuals as they know MSCR programs. They have that experience to be able to, if they're not working to their full capacity virtually, that they'll be able to be reassigned to MSCR with a much lower learning curve. Yeah, in addition to that, this summer, MSCR used all of our 75 full-time staff just about to run these childcare programs. We can't continue to do that because we have community programs that we're operating, and so those staff won't be available for childcare. So another reason why we're depending on other school district staff. Next slide, please.
I'll go ahead and take this slide. First and foremost, when we started planning this and we knew we were moving into the virtual learning model, we knew based on community feedback and overall discussions with community leaders that daycare was going to be the one of the number one priorities coming out of our senior leadership team. And so we have prioritized getting this childcare model up and running. knowing that it was going to rely on MMSD staff and other departments more than usual for MSCR's programming. So in order to do that, in order to logistically get this off the ground in time, we did put together the following budget. We are hopeful that the state will come through with guidelines with the governor's educational emergency response funding that could support daycare. However, we've not yet received those guidelines for how to use the funding from the state. So we await hearing that from the governor. If the kind of rules of using GEAR funding does not allow us to be used for this child care model, we'll look to repurpose within our other COVID-19 funding, either the federal ESSER money and or other local resources. At this time, we don't think we're going to have to increase the tax levy because we do think we'll be able to move some of those COVID funding sources around to fund the daycare model. You're looking at an expense of approximately $1 million, but this is planned out throughout the year. And what we know is that as we move away from virtual learning and toward hybrid and towards in-person, we'll start to revert back to our more traditional way of working. But we wanted to ensure the funding was there. Should we be in virtual learning longer than a quarter, we wouldn't want this to just end on families. So we looked for that overall source of funding. So as Janet mentioned, our leadership team running at each of the sites will all come from MSCR current full-time staff, so that's already budgeted. We will use MSCR seasonal staff who are already trained and expand the number of hours they typically work for us. And that expansion of contracted hours is approximately $1 million. As I said, for the full year, the repurposed MMSD staff is the minimum of 150 personnel that we would need that would be funded through already sourced materials. And then of course, supplies. So that's where we're looking and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you so much, Janet, to give us like some really important updates on MSCR and also to be so nimble and flexible and adjusting for a very specific need for over the summer. So I'm gonna go Chris, Gloria, Savian, and Ali.
Nanda, can I just say something before we move into questions? We had one more slide to talk a bit about the work that we're doing with our partners. And I just wanted to recognize that and acknowledge that and thank Bree and Nathan who have been working closely with us and our partners. And just want to recognize Nichelle for her support with that. But I just wanted to let you guys know that we are indeed, you know, we learned this summer that there's a need in the community for MMSD to play a greater role during the fall than we did in this summer to ensure that not only will MSCR cares take place in our buildings, but we also have been working closely both with MMSD partnerships, MOST and MSCR, and have held a number of meetings with hundreds of people to plan for other providers, not only to do programming in our school buildings, but also in other locations in the community. And our goal, of course, is to have a childcare program in all 32 of our elementary schools. We're about 6 short right now, but we're not done. We have some work to do to make sure that if we somehow don't have programs in each one of those schools, serving another 1,000 kids at least, that will ensure that students from those 6 schools that we don't have programs in, if that stays the case, that we have plans already in place for them to attend programs in schools, either through MSCR or another provider. For instance, if we don't have a program at Gompers, we have a plan for those students to be served at Lindbergh or at Lakeview or at another location on the north side. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that Bree and Nathan have done with MSCR to ensure all of these connections are being made with other partners and providers in the community so that we can serve as many kids as possible and as many families that are going to need this childcare programming.
Thank you. And you have one more slide in regards to
Okay.
Public Health. Melissa, can you move to the next? Yeah.
This slide is kind of more or less what we initially planned when we were going to be in a hybrid model, but certainly still applies. Once kids are back in school buildings, either in a hybrid model or full-time, we're prepared to move forward with our after-school programming in buildings, as well as providing programming, like I said earlier, in other facilities like the Meadowood Neighborhood Center or MSCR Hoyt, so that there are still going to be some opportunities for elementary students to participate in full-day childcare programs on the days they're not in person in school. But not just at the elementary level, we'll be certainly moving forward whenever kids are back in school, that we provide some of that after-school programming for our secondary students as well.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
And thank you, Melissa, for putting the slides back up. So Chris?
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Janet for all of this information and for the work that all of the staff who have been working all summer with students and with families. This is just really impressive, and you're leading the way for how we're going to basically be able to do this and work safely to serve students. So I really appreciate all the work that's going on. I just had one quick question on the registration. I see that the registration there's dates on that, August 5th through the 21st. I guess one of my questions is, are we going to be able to add students as necessary as maybe family situations change or people realize that they need different levels of support? Are we going to be able to add that as we go through the fall first quarter?
Yeah, absolutely. The only, if a program isn't full and if we have staffing available to expand programs, of course we'll do that. But the only issue that may arise for a family is that if they're added later after the registration deadline, transportation may not be available for the first week or so that their child participates. So that's really the reason for that August 21st deadline, is so that MMSD transportation can build those routes and that we can schedule transportation. But of course, we'll continue to work with families.
Okay, thank you.
Savian, Ali, and Gloria.
Thank you so much for the presentation on this work. I have no questions at this time.
Ali?
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to the potential of this work and kind of the long-term scope of the work. I think it was really helpful to hear about lessons learned over the summer that speak directly to what we're looking at in terms of options, and what it will mean to have more of a hybrid model or a shift into more in-person learning and the options around that. Can you speak to the benefits of outdoor learning spaces and the utilization of outdoor learning spaces?
So this summer, of course, we were outside as much as possible. We did put tents up at all of the MSCR sites so that we could participate in activities outside. I have not explored the idea of outdoor spaces for educational purposes, but for MSCR, we'll certainly be outside. We will be supporting virtual learning in classrooms, but certainly building on opportunities for kids to participate in. There was a lot of conversation earlier about play and activities, and we will provide all of those opportunities for students, both inside and out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for speaking to that earlier portion about play-based learning within the answer to your question. I really appreciate you bringing us full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Janet, for your presentation. Just have a question about safety and security of our staff and students. There'll be less people in the buildings. Just wondering what you're planning around that would be? Are we going to have security staff working in the buildings in each of these sites, or?
So what we're requesting for MSCR programming and for other childcare programming is not necessarily to have security staff in the site, in the schools. I guess I'm not real clear on the question. But, you know, we do have procedures and policies in place about checking in and who can be in the building and who should be in the building and how drop off is going to go and how pickup is, so that this summer there were a lot of limitations on who could be in the buildings. And I know that that's going to change this fall, as some students will be learning in person, and there may be more opportunities for families and other individuals to be in schools and other staff. But so, I mean, we're kind of managing our programs, and not sure who else will be using using buildings.
Yeah, Gloria, so these are primarily elementary schools. So they're not the big kind of La Follette, all the doors open environment. These are schools that we know pretty well and that we're used to staffing, and after school environments that MSCR kind of works in and is well familiar with the access and entryways. But due to the restrictions, we'll continue to do all the safety access requirements that MSCR would normally do in the after school environment. So we don't have needs for additional safety and security assistance for the MSCR CARES program. For the overall virtual learning and access to our schools, we've had safety and security assistance surveilling our schools for graffiti and other property damage throughout the spring and summer. And surely that work will happen through Chad Weezy and Karen Kepler's department, but not necessarily, we don't see any additional security needs for MSCR.
Yeah, I just, I'm concerned just because, well, I'm glad that there won't be a lot of entry and exit points. I think that's critical. But given, historically our children have been targets, and I just am cautious about, and then we won't have, right, as many staff around and people around as we would normally. So I just think it's critical for us to have that sort of security mindset and safety mindset around the perimeter, the area of our school, who's around, who's not around. And and I get, you'll follow the regular MSCR policies and procedures around safety and security. I just think that in this time, it's for me, it's heightened, and for a lot of people, because of our current situation of COVID, mental health issues. We're seeing it out in our community, and I just don't want it to come in into our buildings while our children are there. And so,
okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll take that back to Mark Brown and team.
Yeah, I would just like to add to Gloria that that we've already talked with Karen Kepler and Mark Brown, and they will be providing training for all of our MSCR CARE staff around safety and security. So we are working on putting that in place.
Great, thank you, Janet.
You bet.
I'm seeing no more hands. Kelly, do you have anything else to wrap up this conversation? What I was going to ask, because we've been sitting for 3 hours straight, is for just a really quick 2.5 minutes stretch break so we can come back. After your presentation, Kelly, we also have a closed session. So, and your presentation may have some different questions because of the graphs. So if it's okay for folks, 2.5 minutes, and then we'll come back for the last presentation for this meeting.
Thanks so much, Ananda.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know. I feel like she was trying to just like really.
Oh.
I think folks are starting to come back. Thank you, Kelly, for just being so generous with us. I know we're like the last presentation and it's 8:20.
So Ananda, are we going into closed session or are we still in open, or maybe Barb?
So we still have to close this out and start the special meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we just have to close out the instruction work group, whatever's left.
Yeah, there's one more
We gotta-
presentation left.
And then we got to log off, and then there's another link.
Another presentation?
Correct.
No, we have another link that we have to come back for a Zoom meeting for the special meeting. So we have to finish the instruction work group. And so whatever's left, and then we'll adjourn the instruction work group, and then we'll come back for the special meeting.
We have an open, my understanding is we have an open workshop and then a closed session still after this.
Right.
So
That's separate from the instruction work group.
Yes. So let's move to last presentation, Callie. Thank you.
So we're done with, as far as I'm aware, the virtual learning presentation. Lisa, did I miss something?
That's what I thought too.
I thought we had
all done with the all done
childcare.
with virtual learning.
Do we have the childcare plan?
So that's what Janet just presented on?
That was it.
That was MSCR.
And then she didn't talk through the sites. I'm really sorry. I'm following.
Yeah, no,
the-
so Janet had a number of slides in the appendix, which is just for your general understanding. We didn't intend on presenting on it, which is why we put it in the appendix, mostly because we didn't want to make your presentation even longer than 63 some slides. So if there are any other questions, I think Janet has logged off at this point. I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think we're closed, or I think we're done with the instruction work group.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that she kind of talked through, and I was like, why is she talking now about the thing that she has a slide in a little bit? But, and I was trying to text you, Kelly, but I know you were paying attention
Sorry,
to the
yeah.
presentation. So are there any further questions for Kelly around either Kelly's part of the presentation or Janet's part of the presentation? I just had one quick question, Kelly. I know that the CARES Act is going to try to address some of the funding part of it. I know some things just came out this week. So do you have any sense of like where we are? And I know TJ mentioned something, or no, wasn't TJ. So in the previous presentation, we talked about like we're planning to support the virtual learning until December. Do you have a sense of like where we are from a budgetary perspective?
So we have two sources of funding, the CARES Act funding, which our portion after the private school disbursement will be somewhere around $4.5 million. And then the GEAR funding from the governor that we just learned about after the private school portion will be somewhere in the range of $3 million. What we know that together, those are our only two sources of funds. And in line with funding from the federal level, we essentially have to plan for 3 school years, 19-20, which our expenditures are approximately $3 million alone from this last year, 2021, of which we'll have to fund a virtual learning model, potentially a hybrid model, and then getting ready for in-person in school. So that's 3 different school models in 1 school year. Which doesn't come with a small price tag, and then planning for next summer and even into 21-22. So we know the funding's not going to be enough. We'll have to work through our budgeting process, and we'll meet in September for what that looks like in 2021. And then 21-22, hopefully we'll have some more flexibility with some potential referendum funding, or maybe some new federal sources along the way, of which we don't yet know about. But at this time, we're really still waiting on that guidance from the governor on what we can spend the GEAR funding on. It's my probably most urgent need.
Thank you so much. I think that's a good question to wrap up. So should we, I'm really sorry, you all, like I'm just following the presentation on the side, and I called the break a little bit sooner. Are we good to close this meeting? Okay. Can we entertain them? Thank you. And on a second?
Second.
Savian moved, Gloria second, meeting adjourned. Gloria, when do you want us to come back?
Right away. Let's get started right away.
Okay, I'm going to stop this one and then we'll go to our next one.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks.
so much, Melissa.
Yep.